off at number 10, we've got the Gorbals vampire. Back in September of 1954, the children from Gorbals in Glasgow went on a monster hunt looking for the creature that killed their two friends and drank their blood. For 3 nights, hundreds of children between 4 and 14 carried knives, stakes, clubs, and crucifixes and stormed into the creepy necropolis graveyard known locally as the City of the Dead. They were hunting a vampire that was said to be 7 feet tall with blood-red eyes and sharp iron teeth. The children called him the Gorbals vampire. This was actually a real event. On September 23rd, Constable Alex Deeprose was called to the City of the Dead because of a disturbance and found hundreds of armed kids looking for a vampire. Local news outlets picked up the story. Headlines said things like, "Amazing scene as hundreds of children rush cemetery." But the report about the 2 missing children ended up being false. The police heard of no missing children reports at the time. The Gorbals vampire was dismissed as an urban legend, and some say the kids were inspired by American comic books like Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror.
Alright, next up at number 9 now guys, we have the Devils in the Bins. The House of the Bins is an old Scottish ancestral home. General Tam Dalyell was the head of the Dalyell family in the 17th century. Now while he lived there, Tam claimed that every night the devil visited him in his home for a game of cards. He said the devil usually won. Now in retrospect, this might have been a good thing. You see, one night the devil appeared as usual, and as usual the devil and Tam sat down to play cards. This night was different though. This night, for the first time ever, Tam seemed to be getting the upper hand. He was winning. As the game went on, the devil got more and more angry about this. Eventually, when the game looked lost for him, he flew into a rage. The devil then threw a single marble at Tam. It missed and instead landed in the sergeant's pond outside the house. Now for many years people laughed at Tam and dismissed his story as insane. Then, over 200 years later, the pond outside was apparently drained, and what should they find buried in the mud at the bottom but a single shiny marble?
He lost his marble! One marble. One marble? At number 8 we've got Abandoned Annie. The City Chambers is a famous building in Edinburgh, with ancient alleys that run beneath. The streets below the City Chambers are said to be haunted, and they attract psychics, ghost hunters, and mediums. This is because back in the 16th and 17th centuries, this particular area of Edinburgh was hit extremely hard by the plague. The streets used to be littered with bodies and sick people who were banished and left for dead. After the 18th century, the abandoned homes and alleys were sealed, but that doesn't stop people from venturing down there. There have been many strange noises and sightings reported, but most notably a psychic claims to have come into contact with the ghost of a young girl named Annie. Abandoned Annie is a story that began in 1992 after a Japanese psychic called Eiko Gibo went to the close as a part of a documentary on paranormal activity. When the group were touring the area, she came across a room that she at first was too afraid to enter. She said the room had a terrible feeling of sickness, hunger, and cold. But then Eiko went inside the room because she said she was invited by the ghost of a little girl named Annie who had died of the plague. Annie grabbed her hand and said that she had been abandoned by her family and that she had lost her doll. Eiko later went back to the room with a Barbie for Annie to play with, and since then, visitors to Annie's room are told to bring a gift for her. There is now a pile of toys created by people who have visited her room. To this day, people report feeling sick, uneasy, and cold while visiting Annie's room, despite the fact that there is no historical record of any girl named Annie, and the story has been dismissed as a popular urban myth. An urban myth that actually has a happy purpose, apparently. Along with toys, people leave money for Annie, and at the end of every year, the money is counted and given to the sick kids hospital. So far, Annie has raised more than £45,000 for other sick children.
Next up at number 7 now guys, we have the A75. Now that is the name of what's said to be the most haunted road in Scotland bar none. It runs through the county of Dumfriesshire and has been a hub of reports of supernatural activity over the years. It's actually attracted paranormal investigators to it from all over the world. Kathleen Crone is the founder of Mostly Ghostly, great name by the way. Now she said there have been screaming hags, eyeless phantoms, and a menagerie of unearthly creatures witnessed on this famous road. In 1962, perhaps one of the most famous sightings occurred on the road. Derek and Norman Ferguson were driving along the road when a large hen apparently flew into the windscreen of their car. They then saw huge cats and other monstrous creatures pass by them, as well as a phantom furniture van, whatever that is, all of which vanished into thin air. In the years since then, the number of stories has grown to the point where some truck drivers actually avoid the A75 altogether.
Alright, it is time for number 6, the Boneless. The true story of the Boneless comes from the Shetland Islands, a group of small islands off the coast of Scotland, where the inhabitants were once terrorized by a ghostly blob. Yes, you heard that correctly. Stories about a ghostly apparition called the Boneless, and sometimes a frittening, have been whispered toured on the Shetland island for years now. It's based on an account found in the book Shetland Traditional Lore by Jesse Saxby. Although no one could describe the apparition properly, people called it the Boneless because witnesses say it looked like a giant glowing white blob. Others said it looked like a jellyfish or a slimy white cloud. The Boneless would appear pressed up against windows and it never made a sound. It could move though. Apparently it could move faster than a dog. If you had happened to find yourself face to face with the Boneless, you would cower in fear and often die of fright. There's a story about one boy who was dragged by the Boneless to the edge of the cliff. He described it as smelling like rotting flesh. As he heard the waves crashing below, he grabbed the rocks and hung on for life. The Boneless rolled off the cliff and disappeared, and the boy managed to drag himself back to his home to tell his parents. Next, at number 5, we've got the haunting of Castle Stewart. The story goes like this. The Earl of Moray inherited Castle Stewart from his father. He wanted to rent it out, but he couldn't because the castle had such a bad reputation for being haunted. So the Earth tried to improve the castle's reputation by offering a reward to any man who was brave enough to spend the night in the castle. News about the reward spread, and eventually 4 men agreed. A minister, an elder in the Presbyterian church, a local shoemaker, and the last was a large man named Rob Angus. The deal was each of the men had to spend an entire night alone in a haunted room. Once they were inside, the door would be locked and wouldn't be unlocked until the next morning. The minister fell asleep in the room and had a dream about a blood-splattered man who sat down next to him. When he woke up, no one was there. The elder had a similar experience. While he was reading his Bible, the door to the room sprang open, and in walked a man covered in blood. The man drew his dagger on the elder, who fainted. He was found the next morning in complete shock. When it was the shoemaker's turn, he heard the door to the room open. A tall man with hooves for feet appeared in the doorway. The being jumped at the shoemaker and he fainted in terror. He was found unconscious on the floor the next morning. And lastly, it was Rob Angus's turn. Rob Angus was a big, strong Scotsman who said he wasn't afraid of anything. As the servant closed the door to his room, he said, "You will find me as I am, or dead." When the servant returned in the morning, the furniture in the room was broken and all over the place, but there was no sign of Rob. But then, the servant looked out the window and saw Rob Angus lying on the ground, dead. At some point, Rob Angus fell out of the window or was pushed. Various sightings and reports of paranormal activity over the years have given Castle Stewart the reputation of being one of the most haunted castles in the world.
Coming at number 4 now, guys, we have Arthur's Seat Coffin. Coming at number 4 now, guys, we have the Arthur's Seat Coffins. This one comes from Edinburgh. Arthur's Seat is a rocky hill there, sort of a landmark, if you will. One day in 1836, 5 local boys discovered an entrance to a small cave on the rugged northeastern face of that famous hill. There, they found some intricately carved miniature figures set in coffins. I know, that's incredibly creepy. The 17 coffins had actually been left undisturbed for an unknown amount of time. Each casket contained expertly carved human effigies, creepily dressed in very unique clothing. They had painted black boots on and twisted facial expressions. In the years since then, these creepy coffins have defied all attempts to explain them. This has opened the door to a number of creepy urban legends surrounding them. The most popular is that they were created to commemorate the 17 victims of the notorious Edinburgh murderers and grave robbers Burke and Hare. I'm no relation to that Burke though. Okay, maybe somewhere along the line. Awkward.
Getting close now. At number 3, we've got Sawney Bean, Scotland's most famous cannibal. Not much is known about Sawney Bean, but he was said to have been born in the late 15th century. He married a woman who was said to be a witch and moved to Benane Cave in Ayrshire with his new wife. Sawney supported his wife by being a robber, but rather than risk being caught, Sawney murdered his victims and disposed of the evidence by eating the remains. The couple started having children, a lot of them, 14 to be exact, and fed them a high-protein diet of human flesh. Eventually the children grew up and had their own children born of incest, and before long the cave was inhabited by an entire extended family of 48 cannibals, all with a taste for humans. The family remained undiscovered and would ambush unfortunate victims, steal their money, and eat them. Local authorities would find decaying body parts, sometimes pickled, washed up on the surrounding beaches. Eventually King James of Scotland heard about the Sawneys and orchestrated a 400-men manhunt. They found the cave full of human remains and stolen valuables. Sawney Bean was reportedly executed for the mass murder of over 1,000 people, but most historians believe that Sawney never existed, and his story was nothing more than an urban legend.
Moving on to number 2 now, we have Gilly Dhu. I think I'm pronouncing that right. In Scottish legend, he's a solitary Scottish male fairy that lives alone in the forest. He disguises himself in trees so as not to be seen by humans. His light green skin and long branch arms make it almost impossible for people to spot him. However, it's important to note that the Gilly Dhu is usually only this elusive to adults. You see, he's been known to appear and interact with friendly children. Now you should know that doesn't mean that every interaction is a good one. He has been known to prey on people lost in the woods, killing or enslaving them. Perhaps the strangest thing I read about this creature is that he is said to collect the teeth of children to perform protective magic on them. This has led some people to believe that the Gilly-Doo actually gave birth to the legend of the Tooth Fairy, a much lighter story. I think we can all agree. I don't think the Tooth Fairy has killed or enslaved anyone. If you know otherwise, let me know. And finally, number 1 now, we have the Mackenzie Poltergeist. This is perhaps the most famous ghost story in all of Scotland. The Black Mausoleum is the name of a tomb in Edinburgh's Greyfriars Cemetery and has become famous as the home of an evil paranormal entity. Over the years, visitors have reported feeling extreme hot spots and cold spots. They leave with cuts, bruises and burns on their body. Photographic evidence for the legend includes pictures of these injuries as well as pictures from inside the tomb that some claim show an unidentified shape. Others have reported seeing a white figure in the dark, smelling strange odours and hearing knocking noises under the ground and even from inside the tomb itself. If that wasn't enough for you, locals have gone to the grave some days to find dead animals in front of the Black Mausoleum. Some people have even claimed to have been possessed, which led to the grounds being exorcised twice, both unsuccessfully apparently. In the past few decades, it seems as though the Mackenzie Poltergeist has begun to spread. Poltergeist activity has been reported in 4 different houses around the graveyard, and in 2002 a large fire broke out in the residences behind George Mackenzie's tomb.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have King Charles I. Okay, so this is one that goes way back and it really creeps me out. So King Charles I was tried for treason after the Civil War and he ended up being beheaded in 1649. I guess in the 1600s everyone was beheaded, so this wasn't necessarily abnormal, which certainly is weird, but that's a history lesson for another day. The weird part, however, is that apparently his head was sewn back on his body so that he could sit for a portrait, or it was perhaps supposed to be a sign of respect. Either way, it's weird and very gross. I feel terrible for whoever's job it was to do that, and I also feel bad for the artist who was forced to paint that. Talk about a little traumatic. It does certainly make sense though that people say that Charles' ghost still haunts a building, because there is no amount of haunting that could make up for being beheaded and then having your head sewn back onto your body. No thanks. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Kensington system. Queen Victoria's reign began in 1837 and it lasted up until her death in 1901. She was just 18 years old when she found herself on the throne, and it was all by chance as she was actually 5th in line when she was born. This is all stressful enough, but certainly one of the worst parts of her upbringing was being brought up under the Kensington system. This means that her mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, who created this system in order to control her daughter, literally just isolated her away from all of her friends and even from other family members, and apparently this was done to keep her quote-unquote pure. The Duchess would monitor her every move. She would decide who she could see and who she could speak to. Victoria only had 2 friends she could play with growing up, one being her half-sister and the other being her mother's attendant, Sir John Conroy. Victoria was even forced to share a room with her mother, and until she was the queen, she couldn't even walk down the hall by herself. In the end, Victoria placed a lot of blame on John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She even called him the demon incarnate. In our number 8 spot today, we have money making. We obviously know that the British royal family is rich. It certainly isn't a surprise to any of us to hear that. I mean, they made a tax-free $97 million in 2017, so it's not like they're struggling by any stretch of the imagination. And while there are claims that most of their income comes from their private estates and tourism, not everyone believes that this is the case. There are actually quite a few people who believe that the royal family costs British taxpayers a whopping $450 million a year. That's a ton of money. I truly do not know enough about anything to really choose a side, but it certainly is something to think about. I know with taxpayer money we pay a lot of salaries, and it's usually for a good reason, but $450 million is definitely next level. In our number 7 spot today, we have the change of name. So for us here in Canada, later in May, we have a day called Victoria Day. We set off fireworks, people have barbecues, it's like one of those types of holidays. Back in 1819, Queen Victoria, of course, before she was queen, was christened in a mostly private ceremony. It was quite small, her uncle only let a few people come, and at the time of this christening, her name was Alexandrina Victoria. Apparently during this time period, the name Victoria wasn't looked at as a regal name. It had French origin and was almost unique at the time. So flash forward to when Queen Victoria is first taking the throne, she begins getting advised to change her name. They thought that it would give her a better public image if she had a more traditional name. Clearly, as the history books and our Canadian calendar calendars show us, Queen Victoria said, yeah, no thanks, I'm not gonna do that. In our number 6 spot today, we have the controversial history. The British royal family has quite a history of being perhaps less inclusive of others than would normally be accepted. There is actually quite an extensive history of racism in the royal family, and as we now know, especially after that Oprah interview last year, things haven't necessarily recently changed either. There have been certain gestures or small remarks made here and there that have definitely been a little out of touch, I'll call it. And unfortunately, Meghan Markle, being a biracial person, had to experience a lot of it firsthand. I mean, just to give a few examples, Prince Philip did ask Indigenous Australians if they still throw spears at each other, okay? And once, Princess Michael of Kent tried to apologize after being called out for saying something racist, and this is what she said, quote, "To call me racist, it's a knife through the heart because I really love these people. I even pretended years ago to be an African, a half-caste African, but because of my light eyes I did not get away with it, but I dyed my hair black." Okay, there is so much to unpack in that one sentence alone, but I have an extremely strong feeling that this apology probably wasn't well received, especially considering it lacked the whole apology part of an apology. In our number 5 spot today, we have Boy Jones. Okay, I've heard of people being called Boy Jones before, but little did I know Boy Jones was a very real and very creepy person. His full name was Edward Jones, and this little rascal basically stalked the Queen from 1838 to 1841. He managed to break into Buckingham Palace, and we aren't just talking about once. No, we're talking about many, many times. He knew exactly where to go and what to do, and once in the castle, he would hide under the Queen's sofa, he would sit on her throne, and worst of all, he would go through her clothing. Like, what a little creep. He even went as far as to steal her clothes, which is just stupid. Of course, taking evidence of your crimes is just bad practice. Thankfully, he did finally get caught, but man, a few years of sneaking in and sitting on the throne, that's crazy. In our number 4 spot today, we have messy relationships. Joan of Kent lived during the 14th century in England, and she was known as being one of the most beautiful women in all of England. She was said to be quite loving, but it is also said that she had quite a whirlwind and controversial love life. So basically, Joan was only 12 when she had her first marriage. I know, horrifying now, but as was the practice at the time. She married a knight named Tom Holland, but when Tom went to war, Joan was approached by another man, the son of the Earl of Salisbury, who asked for her hand in marriage. Despite the whole Tom situation, she said yes, because at this time there was no way for anyone to know who would be coming back from battle, and she just assumed that Tom had died. It was of course quite the shock to everyone when Tom ended up returning, very much alive, to find out about all of this. A legal battle followed, which Tom ended up winning, and him and Joan went on to raise 4 children. After Tom's passing, however, Joan would go on to marry again, to the dismay of many people. This time she would marry the son of King Edward III, and she went on to become the first Princess of Wales. In our number 3 spot today, we have royal affairs. There have been many, many rumors over the years about the British royal family and their extramarital affairs, and I'm saying that this goes way back. So far back that one of the first accusations of this within the royal family dates all the way back to King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Since then, it has only continued with people such as Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend, Princess Anne and Commander Timothy Lawrence, and of course, Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, just to name a few. The latter of those definitely being the most famous, especially when Prince Charles was confronted about it by his wife at the time, the beloved Princess Diana. Apparently, Charles responded to the confrontation by saying, quote, "Well, I refuse to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress." Maybe not the attitude to keep when speaking to your wife who you're cheating on. I don't know, just a thought. In our number 2 spot today, we have Prince John. This one is said to possibly be one of the darkest secrets of the British royal family. Prince John would have been the uncle of Queen Elizabeth II, but he passed before she was born. Prince John was the 6th child of King George V and Queen Mary, and it is said that he suffered from seizures, likely as a result of epilepsy, although it's hard to diagnose for certain because of all of the secrecy surrounding him and his illness. From the age of 4, when he had his first seizure, until his untimely and early death, Prince John lived in a separate estate where he was cared for by a governess. Many people have since criticized the royal family, calling their treatment of Prince John as callous or inhumane, like they were hiding him away for being ill. Of course, the palace was concerned with the monarchy's public image, and there was a belief at the time that royals shouldn't have any physical or mental ailments, although that of course is impossible. They also didn't include him in public events, which could have been another image thing, and also perhaps because of a worry that he might have a seizure at one of these events. At the end of the day, it was definitely definitely a different time, but the idea of excluding him because he was ill truly is a very sad thought. In our number 1 spot today, we have the flag at half-mast. It is normal for a flag to be flown at half-mast following a great tragedy, so this certainly is not a dark tradition that the royal family has, but it's the time that they did not do this that is dark that I want to talk about today. After Princess Diana's death, people everywhere began mourning the loss, especially considering how young she was and how it all happened so quickly and unexpectedly. But the crazy thing, or I guess when you really think about it, the potentially sinister thing about it, is that the royal family just continued on as if nothing happened. Of course, business still needs to be conducted at times despite grief, but for many of them, there simply was no grief. The flag at Kensington Palace wasn't lowered to half-mast until the people complained about it, because they obviously felt like it was a slight to the princess. There were no public statements made until a day before her funeral, and there were many people who believed that if no one spoke up about this, that there may have never been any action taken by the family at all.
Number 10. No crown, no problem. Okay, directly after his father died in 1936, King Edward VIII took the throne. But the tides quickly turned when less than a year later, he renounced his position. Now, this was huge. This was a massive scandal right off the bat. This is not something that's taken lightly in the royal family. Turns out the woman responsible for stealing his heart was that of Wallis Simpson, American socialite who had already been divorced once before. And at this point, she was working through her second divorce, so you can only imagine how folk reacted to that, right? His proposal to Simpson, of course, caused social and political backlash. The Church of England wasn't so chill with Edward marrying somebody who had already been divorced, so Edward was forced to abdicate. He had to, okay? Edward and Simpson then tied the knot in 1937, and they stayed together until Edward's death much later in 1972, so dare I say, it was worth the trouble. Number 9. A fateful turn of events. Queen Victoria's reign began in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. At just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819, and Queen Victoria was actually 5th in line when she was born. So right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever get to the crown in the first place. And then one by one, all of her family members suddenly began passing away. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed, and then her father and grandfather died, both a week apart from one another. So by time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old and already she was next up. She was next in line for the throne. Number 8. The Irish Famine. The Great Famine took out a lot of people, not just Victorian women, right? Back in 1845, a potato crop that a lot of the Irish population relied on were just suddenly no longer available. A group of microorganisms wiped them all out, and in result, around 1 million folk died or had to leave. It was draconian law and British ruling that made the exported food hard to reach people, right? Now this famine led to Irish independence and of course anti-union movements. The show Victoria actually pulled no punches back in 2017. An episode showed the true happenings behind the Great Irish Famine and behind the role that Queen Victoria herself played in coming to the aid of her then subjects. The death of at least 1 million. This was a very dark 7 years in Irish history. Historian Christine Keneally spoke out and says, quote, "There is no evidence that she had any real compassion for the Irish people in any way," end quote. Number 7. Kensington system. So as if that wasn't already stressful enough, Victoria was brought up under something called the Kensington system, which if you haven't heard before is pretty awful. Victoria's mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this system to control her daughter. She literally isolated the child from mates or family members, anybody, you name it. Her mother did this to keep her pure. Victoria only had 2 playmates growing up. She had her half-sister, Princess Feodora of Llyn, and the Duchess's attendant, Sir John Conroy, his daughter, Victoire. I mean, I only had 3 friends growing up, so like I get it, but this is just cruel, you know what I mean? Give her some options. She shared a room with her mother until she was the queen. She literally couldn't walk down the hallway alone. Victoria has reflected on her childhood, and it's confirmed that she hated John Conroy for manipulating her mother. So it's very confirmed that she was not happy with any of this. She referred to him as demon incarnate. Number 6, Meghan Markle solo strut. Okay, back in May 2018, we all set our alarm, okay? We woke up and we watched this royal wedding. It was lovely. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, his new Duchess. This was historic. At the historic wedding, Thomas Markle was a no-show. Meghan just walked down the aisle by herself in front of, 1 billion people watching at home or streaming it. No pressure. It was thought that at the time, this was because of Thomas's health issues. See, prior, Thomas suffered a heart attack just days before the wedding. So of course, nobody was upset. It was, of course noted though. Now, cut to a year or so later, Thomas and the Duchess aren't as close, it seems. There's some beef unfolding. Thomas even spoke out against his own daughter. There was a scandal Pendle, where Meghan spoke to Oprah, you know, Oprah. It was that whole tell-all experience. Meghan actually said to her father, if you tell me the truth about working with paparazzi, then we can help. But he wasn't able to do that, and that for me has really resonated, especially now as a mother. Number 5. Lead-based makeup. When I started here at the studio, I was like, okay, gotta put on some face cream maybe, drink some water, get rid of like some of these bags, I hope. Finding a skincare routine of any sorts is easy now. The lovely World Wide Web has our backs. It's a wonderful era that we live in now, but the cosmetic game back in the 18th century, oh boy, not so fun, was it? In the 18th century, lead mixed with vinegar was used as makeup. Yeah, you would look more pale, you would have the Victorian look, gotta have those veins popping out, all serious and such, with a splash of sulfur, of course, to make those freckles pop. Queen Elizabeth I used cosmetics containing lead, mercury, and arsenic, the same poison that took out George III and Napoleon Bonaparte. Yeah, not safe at all. In fact, arsenic was on the priority list of hazardous substances. So yeah, toxic metal exposure is still an issue we're facing in this era, let alone the Victorian era. Number 4. Close cousins. The life of Queen Victoria wasn't anything like a fairy tale, obviously. So when you think about the royal family, at least when I was younger, I thought being a queen or a king meant you could just eat chocolate all day, play chess, and then attend a gala. Yeah, you just look cute and go to the ball every single day. No, it's not quite that really at all. Queen Victoria had to do everything herself. She even had to propose to Prince Albert. Like, come on. Now, it's royal tradition that nobody shall propose to a reigning monarch, so it made sense. So cut to October 1839, Victoria asked Albert for his hand in marriage. We love it. It all started when the pair was 17 years old. Victoria met the young prince, of course, at Kensington Palace during the Kensington system, and they were put together because Victoria's uncle felt like this could be beneficial down the road. Yeah, first cousins getting married sounds bizarre, but as you've seen on Game of Thrones or even this channel, it's quite common. Number 3, Boy Jones and other attempts. Being the queen and all, a security team is always needed, and during her reign, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. The first attack was in 1840. An 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford fired towards the queen's carriage. Probably took 14 seconds to prepare, right? When Edward was accused of high treason, he was actually found not guilty due to insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her. Again, both missed, not great aim. In 1849, her carriage was then attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, ran up and started hitting her with his cane. Victoria was okay during all this, but of course she was shook. This is some dark history. But then things got a little worse. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened there, I saved it for the end because it's quite creepy. A teenager stalked the queen back in 1838 until 1841. It was quite a long time. His name was Edward Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once. The guy just knows a route in, and he would break in often and would hide under the queen's sofa. Yeah, he wouldn't break anything or steal anything. He would just sit on her throne. But he would also do one of the worst things ever. He would go through her drawers. Number 2, Bloody Mary. England's first female monarch, Mary I, ruled for just 5 years. The only surviving child of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Mary took the throne after the brief reign of her half-brother, and they say she was an evil queen, but after my homework, I'd have some chips on my shoulders too. She was married at 9 and then at 11. At such a young age, everyone's yelling at you because you're too young to have kids. Like, I couldn't even imagine the pressures that were given to her, right? That's awful. She was promoted and demoted so many times, no wonder she snapped, honestly. Every time she was close to the throne, all of a sudden her family tree was just rearranged by law, right? How confusing is that? Her dad also decided to go down the other family route. She is infamously remembered for burning 300 English Protestants at the stake, which earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. So yeah, it's horrible, horrible stuff. She really snapped. Her brother found a loophole with religion, so she was like, okay then, just light him up, I guess. She's also remembered as teaming up with her half-sister Elizabeth I and ruling together, making them the first 2 British queens. She was spoiled from birth, but she was pretty badass, not gonna lie. And finally, number 1, Queen Elizabeth's health. The world was left in disappointment when we read that Queen Elizabeth got COVID. I remember early on Tom Hanks got it and we're all like, come on Woody, you know, it was kind of, we're rooting for him. But when the Queen got it, it was just deflating, right? The 95-year-old monarch was celebrating her platinum jubilee, meaning this is now 70 years on the throne. 2022 is a staple for the royal family. And on top of that, the Queen has also taken on these royal family scandals. They're unfolding one by one and she's seeing them all. Queen Elizabeth also lost her companion. Her husband, Prince Philip, passed away April 9th, 2021. So she was quite lonely facing all of these scandals. The most controversial of which was Prince Andrew's settlement with his sexual assault accuser. Yeah, she has to deal with that while she's dealing with COVID.
Starting us off at number 10, money problems. With any kind of large-scale event, especially an event for a king, comes pageantry. And with pageantry, of course, comes the need for a deep pocketbook. And when it comes to the first coronation England has seen in 70 years, many in the public are concerned about how much this is all going to cost. That being said, it's a little bit more complicated than that. For starters, the ceremony is paid for by the government, and despite that the king has reportedly asked for a slimmed down ceremony due to the cost of living crisis, royal sources are adamant that their feedback indicates that people want to see a large celebration for the UK's new monarch. Quote, while it is likely to come under pressure to show sensitivity during the current cost of living crisis, the government is expected to use the ceremony as an important diplomatic opportunity to present the UK to the world. However, many on the internet feel as though it's in bad taste for the government to spend so much money on the coronation when it could be put towards the cost of living crisis in the country, and moreover that this could affect the issue even further. Now again, it's just a prediction, but who knows how this could all bubble up after all is said and done. Next up at number 9, Harry and Meghan. Now, it wouldn't be a royal list without a bit of tea from the notorious Meghan and Harry, now would it? For a while, there was a lot of speculation about if the pair would even be invited, after the rather large blow-up that surfaced between the family following the couple's Netflix special and Harry's memoir release. But, as it turns out, they were indeed invited to attend. That being said, only Harry is set to attend the ceremony, and Meghan will reportedly be staying in the US with the kids. The official reason for Meghan staying behind is apparently because the coronation happens to fall on the same weekend as their son Archie's 4th birthday. However, many have speculated that Harry's mere attendance will likely spark some new drama, and that Meghan's lack of attendance is sure to do the same. Next up at number 8, crowns. When it comes to the monarchy, we all know by now that there is a skeleton or two in that closet. One of the most talked about, of course, is the colonization of many countries, which in turn, among other things, resulted in 2 of the royal crowns having some rather controversial diamonds. Now, one of these very controversial stones, the Koh-i-Noor, is a part of the Queen Mother's coronation crown, and it's one of the largest cut diamonds in the world. However, it has been said it's not going to be used for this ceremony. However, the other crown, the Imperial State Crown, is still set to be put on the new king towards the end of the ceremony, as well as when he appears on the Buckingham Palace balcony. The Imperial Crown contains the Cullinan II diamond, sometimes referred to as the Second Star of Africa, and although it was gifted to Edward VII on his 66th birthday, there are some out there who feel that it's in bad taste to use these crowns in this day and age. And some online folks even believe it could be bad luck, and that something terrible could happen should they go through with the tradition. I don't know. I mean, it is a little bit speculative, but I guess you never know. Coming in at number 7, Harry and Camilla. So it's not just drama with Harry and Meghan that folks are sure will boil up with the upcoming royal proceedings, but the baggage with Queen Consort Camilla as well. To give you a short briefing, in case you don't already know, in Harry's recent memoir, Spare, he included quite a few details of private conversations with his family, which has since been the subject of many online articles. However, it is the tensions between him and Camilla that many online folks believe will hit an all-time high after the coronation. Essentially, in the book, the prince singled out Camilla, the queen consort, accusing her of leaking private conversations to the media in an effort to rehabilitate her image after marrying Charles. And considering neither has spoken since the release, and the coronation will be the first time they're in the same room together since it all went down, some people out there are sure that we will be seeing some intense drama
drama after the coronation comes to a close. Coming in at number 6, Harry and William. Not only are there predictions for tensions to rise between the palace and Meghan and between Harry and the Queen Consort Camilla, but maybe the most predicted tension that will follow this coronation is between Harry and his brother Prince William. Similarly to the other relationships in his family, the bond between Harry and his brother was deeply affected due to the Netflix series and Harry's memoir. Now, I'm not here to say that one of them was right and one of them was wrong, but it's been made quite public that Prince William feels betrayed by his brother and that he is reportedly not looking forward to seeing him at their father's coronation. Now, all that being said, many have speculated that the estranged brothers' relationship could continue to worsen after the ceremony, creating even more problems down the road. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out. Coming in at number 5, protests. So it's no secret that while there are many out there who live and breathe the British monarchy, some would rather it didn't exist at all. Over the years, there have been plenty of British citizens, celebrities, talk show hosts, you name it, who've taken to Twitter and been pretty outward about their less than celebratory feelings toward the whole concept. And now, with the Queen sadly gone, some people are wishing that everything just be put to an end. So much so that there is a movement on Twitter using the hashtag #NotMyKing who are pledging to protest outside Windsor Castle not only on Coronation Day, but maybe even after the event finishes. The protest will be led by a man named Graham Scott, who is the chief executive for a campaign group called Republic. Quote, "The coronation is a celebration of hereditary power and privilege. It has no place in a modern society." Later stating as well, quote, "We want to see the monarchy abolished and big royal events are a good opportunity to make that point, and particularly at the coronation." Now, to be fair, this isn't the first time there have been protests at a royal event by any means. In fact, previous protesters for such events have even been arrested. But that doesn't seem to deter Graham and his Republic. So, as of right now, it looks like a protest is in the cards. Coming in at number 4, end of the monarchy. Well, there are a few wild predictions out there about what is going to happen after King Charles's coronation. This one is definitely one of the more out there theories. Several users took to Reddit when the news broke last year about the new king, stating that his reign will be the end of the monarchy. And while it might all sound like just some internet drama at first, there are groups out there who are trying to make that a reality. Countries like Jamaica have already been in the process of trying to remove him as the head of state. Plus, the same guy planning the protest on Coronation Day, Graham Scott, says, quote, "I welcome the announcement, and I think it's the beginning of the end for monarchies in the Caribbean. I imagine it will jolt other countries to up their game and start doing the same, from New Zealand to Canada and everyone in between." He then continues on saying, quote, "Particularly overseas. I think a lot of countries aren't that interested. I was speaking to our New Zealand counterpart who said people in New Zealand are not going to be paying much attention to the coronation, and I think that's the case across the Commonwealth." Now, all that being said, at this point, it's merely a theory, but still, that doesn't mean it doesn't have people talking. Coming in at number 3, Charles will abdicate. As far as predictions go, there is one guy who people tend to look to, the 15th century seer Nostradamus. And if we are understanding correctly, he seems to think Charles is going to have a very short reign. In the 2005 book Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies for the Future, written by Mario Reading, Mario explains Nostradamus' prediction that says the king's reign will not last long, and that he may soon abdicate the throne in favor of his son. Mario has made quite a career interpreting the famous seer's quotes, one of which seems to have correctly predicted the late Queen Elizabeth's death last year. I mean, could it just be a coincidence? Sure. But there are some out there who believe that since the seer correctly predicted one aspect surrounding the royal family, who's to say he can't be correct about another? Coming in at number 2, the end of the Vatican. While the Vatican was only declared its own independent state less than 100 years ago, papacy and the Catholic Church date back as far as the 7th century. However, shockingly, according to the one and only Nostradamus, 2023 could be the downfall of papacy and the Vatican entirely. And considering Nostradamus also predicted the death of the Queen and a potentially short-lived monarchy the same year, it has led many to believe that there could maybe even be a connection, which would be wild. Apparently, as it was foretold, in the year 2023, the current pope will resign and he will be the last true pope. His replacement, who will be named Peter, will create and or be a part of a scandal that is so shameful to the church and papacy that it will bring down the entire Roman Catholic Church. Quote, "In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will be Peter the Roman who will feed his flock amid many tribulations, after which the seven-hilled city will be destroyed and the dreadful judge will judge the people." Now, it's no secret that the Vatican, as well as the monarchy, have been involved in a few scandals, to put it lightly, many of which would have ended the career of just about anything or anyone else in the world. So what else could they be involved in that would finally be the last straw? I suppose we'll just have to wait and see if it comes true or not. And last up in our number 1 spot, a celestial fire. Speaking of the one and only Nostradamus, it's not just the abdication of the throne that we're going to see after the coronation, but apparently we're also in store for a giant celestial fire to break out. The French seer famously predicted a celestial fire on the royal edifice in 2023, and depending on how it's interpreted, it could mean the royal family is in for something bad. Some followers of Nostradamus believe he means that our sky will quite literally be on fire, which not only sounds like a doomsday prophecy, but would certainly cause a disruption in the current monarchy. While some have interpreted his vision a bit more poetically, suggesting that it signifies a new world from the ashes of an old one, which, again, it's the first coronation in 70 years, so it's definitely a new world. That being said, either way you cut it, Nostradamus thinks some way or somehow the world as we know it will die in 2023. And I guess that prediction, paired with the fact that we have a new king, has people feeling a little uneasy, with some even going as far to say that the coronation is gonna have something to do with it.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Brievel's Castle in Gloucester. I don't know, if I said that wrong, remove some letters. I don't know what to tell you. Brievel's Castle is a ruined Norman fortress located in the Forest of Dean, and over the years the castle has been the subject of many haunting tales and ghostly sightings. One of the most famous stories of that is the White Lady who is said to haunt the castle. According to legend, she is the ghost of a woman who was wrongly accused of stealing from the castle and was subsequently executed. Her ghost has been reported to roam the castle's halls and corridors, and she has been seen by many visitors and staff members. Another famous ghostly tale from the castle is that of the phantom coach, who is said to drive up to the castle gates before disappearing without a trace. Legend has it that the coach is driven by the ghost of a former owner of the castle who was killed by his own wife and her lover. In addition to these tales, there have also been reports of unexplained noises and strange apparitions throughout the castle. Despite the many stories of ghosts and hauntings, this castle remains a popular tourist destination and a fascinating piece of British history. Why not head over for a visit? I heard you can even stay in the oubliette. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Glasgow Necropolis. This place is exactly what it sounds like. It is a necropolis, and what place is more haunted than a necropolis? The Glasgow Necropolis is a Victorian cemetery located on a hill overlooking Glasgow, Scotland. Over the years, it has become a popular spot for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts due to the many haunting tales that surround the site. One of the most famous ghost stories associated with the necropolis is that that of a female ghost. According to legend, she is the ghost of a wealthy woman who was buried in a white dress and veil. Her ghost has been seen by many visitors floating among the tombstones and crypts. Another tale involves the ghost of a man who was buried alive. Legend has it that he woke up in his coffin and tried to escape but died before he could make it out. Visitors have reported hearing knocking sounds coming from the ground and feeling cold spots near his grave. At the end of the day, while there are thousands of people buried here, only a small group have gravestones and even fewer have names. This only adds to the eerie nature of the cemetery. There are even rumors that a vampire just might be wandering the grounds looking for its next prey. All in all, this place is full of haunting tales, urban legends, and a whole bunch of spook. In our number 8 spot today, we have Pluckley in Kent. The village of Pluckley, located in the county of Kent, England, is known for being one of the most haunted villages in the entire country. There are numerous ghost stories associated with the village, many of which have been passed down through generations. One of the most famous tales is that of the Screaming Woods, a dense forest area on the outskirts of the village. According to legend, the woods are haunted by the ghost of a highwayman who was caught and killed by villagers, and his screams can still be heard at night. Another famous ghost story involves the Watercress Woman, a ghostly figure who is said to appear near a stream in the village, carrying a basket of watercress on her arm. It is believed that she drowned in the stream while picking watercress, and her ghost has been seen by many villagers over the years. Other reported sightings include ghosts of a monk, a schoolmaster, and even a haunted pub. Despite the spooky tales, Pluckley remains a charming and picturesque village, attracting visitors from around the world. Visit if you dare. In our number 7 spot today, we have Chillingham Castle in Northumberland. Chillingham Castle, located in Northumberland, England, is considered to be one of the most haunted castles in the country. The castle has a dark and mysterious history, and there have been numerous reports of paranormal activity over the years. One of the most famous ghosts associated with the castle is the Blue Boy. According to legend, the ghost is a spirit of a young man who was imprisoned in a room in the castle and left to die. His ghost has been seen by many visitors, appearing as a blue flash of light or as a boy dressed in blue clothing. Another famous tale is that of a specific room in the castle where prisoners were once harmed and then executed. Visitors have reported feeling cold spots, hearing unexplained noises, and even feeling the presence of the ghosts of the tormented prisoners. Other reported sightings include ghosts of a lady in white, a soldier, and even a ghostly cat. In our number 6 spot today, we have Corfe Castle. Corfe Castle, located in Dorset, England, is a ruined fortress with a rich history and many ghostly tales. The castle was originally built in the 11th century and was destroyed during the English Civil War in the 17th century. One of the most famous ghosts associated with the castle is that of Lady Banks, the wife of the castle's owner during the Civil War. According to legend, she defended the castle against enemy soldiers and was killed during the siege. Her ghost has been seen wandering the castle ruins, dressed in a long white gown. Another famous tale is that of the Drummer Boy, a ghostly figure who is said to haunt the castle gatehouse. According to legend, the boy was caught spying on enemy soldiers, and this swiftly led to his demise. His ghost has been seen and heard drumming his sticks on the castle walls. As you walk up the steps to the castle, you might also learn about Edward the Martyr, who was set to be king until he also lost his life here at the hands of his own stepmother, who wanted her own birth son to be the heir to the throne. Other reported sightings include ghosts of soldiers, knights, and even a headless woman. Didn't see that one coming. In our number 5 spot today, we have Whitby Abbey, North Yorkshire. Whitby Abbey is a ruined Gothic abbey located in the seaside town of Whitby, North Yorkshire in England, and upon looking at it, it totally makes sense why people say this was part of the inspiration for Dracula. The abbey has a rich history and has been the subject of many haunting tales over the years. One of the most famous ghost stories associated with the abbey is that of the Whitby Abbey ghost. Of course. According to legend, the ghost is the spirit of a young woman who fell to her death from the abbey's high tower while trying to escape her angry husband. Her ghost has been seen wandering the abbey ruins dressed in a white dress. Go Ghosts really seem to vibe with white dresses for some reason. Another famous tale is that of the Black Abbot, a ghostly figure who is said to haunt the abbey's grounds. According to legend, the Black Abbot was a former abbot of the monastery who was executed for his crimes. His ghost has been seen wearing a black robe and carrying a book. Other reported sightings include ghosts of monks, nuns, and even a ghostly dog. Despite the many spooky tales, Whitby Abbey remains a popular tourist destination, offering visitors a glimpse into the fascinating history of the abbey and the paranormal activity associated with it. In our number 4 spot today, we have Glencoe, Argyll. Glencoe is a beautiful and rugged valley located in the Argyll region of Scotland, and is pretty famous for being one of the settings in the Bond film Skyfall, but it's also famous for its haunting tales. The area is steeped in history, and it all starts back in 1692 with what is known as the Massacre of Glencoe. In that year, soldiers loyal to the English crown killed members of the MacDonald clan who had been hosting them as guests. It is said that the ghosts of the lost MacDonalds still haunt the valley, seeking revenge on their killers. Another famous tale is that of the Grey Man. According to legend, the Grey Man is a ghostly figure who is said to haunt the summits of the mountains in Glencoe. His ghostly presence has been reported by many climbers and hikers over the years. In our number 3 spot today, we have Highgate Cemetery, London. This cemetery is located in London, and for years it has been the central point of many a horrific tale. These stories include those of demons, ghosts, and all things paranormal, and even the famous Highgate vampire. Legend goes that the cemetery is home to this vampire, as first reported by 2 girls walking through the area. They claimed to see the dead rise from their graves. Soon after this report came the discovery of animal carcasses, which is never a good sign, but to make matters worse, all of these ones had been drained of their blood. Stories of the vampire spread like wildfire, and people were rightfully pretty creeped out. This all led to the vampire hunt that took place on Friday, April 13th, 1973. Friday the 13th. It's never good. During this hunt, residents of the town began exhuming bodies and then also beheading them. Okay? There are still many rumors and stories that swirl around the area, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say, if the gates to hell weren't located here before the beheadings, they definitely are now. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Scariest Inn in Wales. I love visiting a place that has lots of history. You know, when you enter a building and can learn about its history and the people who used to walk in its halls, it's just so interesting and very cool, except for when you're sipping away on a cold tasty pint and find out that where you're sitting is a place that used to be used for public hangings. Yeah, things get a bit more grim when you bring that story up, alright? I don't know if I want what's on those taps. That is exactly the history behind the Scariest Inn. The upper area of the pub was once used as a courthouse where people would stand trial. If the person on trial was convicted and sentenced to death, I guess this place was super convenient because they also wouldn't have to waste any time and could just carry out the sentence right then and there. A bit dark, I'd say. The bar decided it would keep the creepy little cell that was once used to hold the prisoners, which seems like an odd choice, but I guess it's all in the name of history. It is estimated that around 180 executions took place here, and to this day you can still take a peek at the hanging beam that was used way back when. Not exactly sure I'd want to, as there's no way that thing isn't cursed. Many people who have been to the bar state that they have felt things like a sudden drop in temperature, the feeling of a rope around their neck, or even seeing some strange, scary, shadowy figures. I got a strange feeling that if you were to head into the cell that's still around, you just might find yourself in a place that you don't want to go to. In our number 1 spot today, we have Blickling Hall in Norfolk. Blickling Hall, located in Norfolk, England, is a beautiful, stately home that dates back to the 15th century, and it has been the subject of numerous reported ghost sightings and paranormal activity. One of the most famous ghost stories associated with the hall is that of the Anne Boleyn ghost. According to legend, Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, was born at Blickling Hall, and her ghost is said to haunt the property. Her ghost has been seen wearing a white dress and carrying her own severed head. That is really about as haunting as it gets. Apparently on the anniversary of her execution, people have reported seeing Anne ride up to the estate in a ghostly carriage, driven by a man who is also headless. Another famous tale is that of the Screaming Lady. It is said that a lady who was killed in the hall has been heard screaming in the corridors at night. The estate is now owned by the National Trust because no one else would want to buy that haunted of a house, and it remains a popular spot for those interested in history as well as the paranormal. normal.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have Who Put Bella in the Witch Elm. Those are the words that first appeared in graffiti in 1944 in Birmingham. They may sound like nonsense to you, but they were referencing a murder. You see, the year before, 4 boys in the nearby town of Hagley discovered the body of a woman in the trunk of a witch elm. Police estimated that she had been killed and put there about 18 months before. The woman was never identified, but the graffiti, that creepy question of who put Bella in the witch elm, that kept appearing. It seemed that whoever started writing that message had knowledge about the case, or may have even been the one who killed the woman, presumed to be called Bella. In the decades since then, there have been a number of theories about who killed Bella. Some say she was a victim of witchcraft, and that her severed hand was proof of a dark ritual called the Hand of Glory. Either way, it seems that someone was once out there who knew what really happened and wanted to get people to investigate by writing that one creepy question everywhere they could. Alright, moving on to number 9 now, we have the Solway Spaceman. This one used to creep me out a lot as a kid. I was absolutely fascinated by it though. Perhaps some of you guys watching this are about the same age as I was when I discovered this, so I'm happy to pass this on to the next generation. The Solway Spaceman is a mysterious picture taken in 1964 by Jim Templeton in Cumbria, England. Jim took the picture of his 5-year-old daughter, but to his surprise, when he got the picture developed, there appeared to be a figure in a spacesuit in the background. Jim insisted that he did not see anyone around them when the picture was taken. It didn't take long for people to start talking about aliens or time travelers. These theories only grew louder when Jim claims 2 men who said they were from the government visited him but refused to show any ID, and then demanded he showed them where the picture was taken. In the years since then, some have said that the spaceman is nothing more than a view of Jim's wife from behind, her dress appearing white from overexposure. Read a full article on this if you like. It's a really interesting story. Moving on to the number 8 spot now, we have the suicidal dogs. For anyone who has been watching this channel for a few years now, this one may be familiar. I think I mentioned it in a video like 3 years ago. Over the past 50 years, about 50 dogs have fallen about 50 feet from Overton Bridge in Scotland. They weren't pushed, they weren't chased, they've just thrown themselves off, and nobody knows why this keeps happening. All of these dog suicides happen at the same spot, just before the final 2 parapets on the right hand side of the bridge. It almost always happens on clear sunny days, and all of the dogs were long-nosed breeds such as Labradors, Collies and Retrievers. A few of the dogs survived. If they were humans, you could ask them what had come over them, but it's a bit more difficult with dogs. Rumours that Overton Bridge and the nearby Overton House being haunted have only grown stronger, and some say the dogs are just picking up on an energy that is beyond human comprehension. In any case, it's an absolute mystery. Next up at number 7 now, we have Madeleine McCann. This will be a name familiar to most people from the UK. Madeleine was a 3-year-old girl who went missing on May 3rd, 2007 while on a family trip in Portugal's Praia de Luz. Her parents were dining with friends in a tapas bar just round the corner, and the group had regularly been checking on their kids. Maddie was reported missing at 10 PM. Her brothers and sisters, who were 1-year-old twins, were found sleeping safely in the apartment. It's been over 11 years since then, and so far theories have ranged from botched burglaries, being stolen by predators, or even sold to a rich family in the Middle East. Both the British and Portuguese police continue their investigations to this day. Moving on now to number 6, we have Britain's Roswell. That's the nickname that's been given to a bizarre incident that took place in 1980 in Suffolk. Locals in Rendlesham Forest reported strange lights in the area. At first people dismissed it, but then even a US military official who was stationed there reported seeing flying lights in the sky that lowered into the woods and sent cattle into a state of frenzy. When they got to the spot where the lights appeared to land, they found only burnt marks on the ground. One of the American officials who witnessed the event was Colonel Charles Holt. He reported the sightings to the British Ministry of Defence. When they didn't appear to make any efforts to investigate, he accused both the US and the UK of having agents cover up the whole event. To this day, no official explanation has been given for Britain's Roswell. Coming at number 5 now, we have the hairy hands of Devon. This one comes from the 1920s in Devon, a time when locals swore there were a roaming pair of hairy hands in the area. This is perhaps the strangest one on this list. Back then, there was was a strange surge of fatal and serious crashes on a stretch of road that travels through a desolate patch of Dartmoor. Some of the crashes were fatal, but from the survivors came a strange tale. Many of them said a pair of rough, hairy hands appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their steering wheel and smashed their cars into a ditch. Police investigated the road and they found that there was a problem with its surface. Others weren't convinced though and said they'd never had any problems with the road either before or after the hairy hands incidents. So what exactly was it? Moving on to number 4 now, we have the Loch Ness Monster. This has to make the cut in a video like this. Whether or not you believe an ancient reptilian creature lurks the waters of Loch Ness in Scotland, there is still a lot of mystery surrounding its many sightings. Going back over 1,400 years ago, Saint Columba was said to have rescued a man from suffering a brutal attack from a water beast in the River Ness. This story seemed to bubble under the surface with the local community for hundreds of years, but in 1933, after a number of sightings, people began to refer to the beast as the Loch Ness Monster. In 1934, Robert Kenneth Wilson published a photograph of what people claimed to be proof of Nessie. The picture showed a creature with dinosaur-like features with a long neck and a small head. The picture was later found to be a hoax, but the legend itself has never died down, becoming an international phenomenon. Like I said at the start, even if you don't think the Loch Ness Monster is real, all these sightings over the years require some sort of explanation. Moving on now to number 3, we have Jill Dando. In 1999, Jill Dando was a primetime TV journalist famous across the country. She was shot after arriving home in Fulham, West London at 11:30 am on April 26, 1999. She had just put her key in the lock when someone grabbed her from behind. The killer held her with his right arm, forced her to the ground and fired a single gunshot through her left temple in what police described as a professional style execution. The following year, police arrested a Barry George who lived nearby to Jill's house. He was convicted and jailed for life, but eventually won an appeal against conviction in 2007. Since then, police have been exploring a number of different leads, including a jealous ex-boyfriend, Eastern European assassins, a mistaken identity, or perhaps the fact that she worked on Crime Watch, a show that exposed criminals to a national audience. Either way, it's been 19 years and counting, but there are still shadows of doubt over the case. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the Highgate Vampire. This one comes from North London, where Highgate Cemetery is said to have been home to an actual vampire during the 1960s. Some of you guys might just dismiss this right away as an urban legend, but a vampire is perhaps the only explanation for this mystery, no matter how far-fetched it seems. Back then, a group of young people who were interested in the occult began roaming the overgrown cemetery. On December 21st, 1969, one of the group, David Farrant, spent the night there. What happened on that night remained a mystery for 2 months, but David couldn't hold it back anymore. On December 21st, 1969, he wrote a letter to his local paper saying he had seen a supernatural grey figure. Other people began to speak up and said that they had seen a figure too, a tall man wearing a hat, a ghostly cyclist, and also a figure walking out into a pond. There were too many sightings now to just dismiss. A man called Sean Manchester put forward the theory that a king vampire of the undead was practicing black magic there. Some of you may dismiss that as ridiculous, but so far it really is the best theory for these mysterious sightings. And finally, number 1 now, we have Jack the Ripper. Some of you may have seen this coming a mile off. It's a story that's become famous across the world. From August to November 1888, a killer murdered and butchered at least 5 prostitutes in London's Whitechapel area. They were all killed with a cut to the throat and all had their abdomens mutilated. Some even had their internal organs removed. The police received one letter claiming to be from the killer. He referred to himself as Jack the Ripper, and the name just stuck with the public. All police had to go on was the fact that due to the killer's precise removal of organs, he may have had surgical knowledge. When the killing stopped, the police investigation eventually went cold. Now, the mystery is left in the hands of modern day researchers, and many of them have their theories on the Ripper's identity.
All aboard the corpse train at number 10. Back in the early 1900s, at the dawn of the age of the London Underground, back when escalators were wooden and trains were creepier, there was a decidedly scary rumour going around. A lot of people swear that there used to be a special train that transported corpses from the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel to morgues in the city. This makes a lot of sense because not only would it have been quicker, it also would have spared Victorian-era Londoners exposure to sickness and disease. Now, the plague might not have been rife at that time, but other nasties were.
were. Adding substance to the legend of the corpse train, a lot of people swear there's a bricked up tunnel at Whitechapel, saying it's the old entrance to the corpse train route. On top of that, there is also an abandoned station nearby called St Mary's on Whitechapel Road. Anyway, a lot of people think that the lost souls on board the corpse train still haunt Whitechapel station. Whitechapel, man, it was a spooky area. It was also the old stomping ground of Jack the Ripper. Speaking of Jacks, we've got another Jack at number 9. We've got Spring-Heeled Jack. Do we like a leaping demon? No, we don't. Say it with me now. This beastie was an urban legend back in Victorian era in London. Why they needed urban legends when they had legit killers and nasty illnesses, I don't know, but hey, those Victorians needed to get their rocks off somehow. Reports of Spring-Heeled Jack popped up in 1837 amid a spate of weird attacks around Clapham Common. Mary Stevens was walking to Lavender Hill through the park when a figure leapt out at her. He kissed her and ripped off her clothes with claws. Mary described him as cold and clammy. The girl's screams caused the man-like creature to spring away. The next day, a man fitting the attacker's description was seen jumping in front of a carriage, causing it to crash. He then reportedly escaped by jumping over a 9-foot wall whilst laughing, garnering him the name Spring-Heeled Jack in the media. The light-footed devil was officially recognised by the Lord Mayor of London on the 9th of January 1838. Further sightings and reports cropped up in newspapers, including a much publicised attack on the 19th of February. This attack happened on 2 women, and one described him as vomiting blue and white flames while his eyes resembled red balls of fire. Goodness gracious. My favourite is the 1867 illustration of the devil, it's pretty good. Now, the devil seemed to move from London up to the northwest of England. He was last spotted in Liverpool in 1904. Coming into number 8, we have the sad tale of the crying girl at King's Cross Station. This is a very, very sad tale indeed, but some say King's Cross Station is haunted by the spirit of a crying young woman. On the evening of the 18th of November 1987, there was a truly horrifying fire on the Piccadilly line escalator at King's Cross rail station. At this time, the escalator was made of wood and the grease under the contraption made it a fire hazard waiting to ignite. And ignite it did. A match was dropped down the side of the escalator, spreading a major blaze that burned so hot the ticket office floor melted and collapsed. 31 people brutally died in the blaze, with a further 100 injured. Those who died did so horribly. They say that a traumatic death is a ghost maker, and 31 people had just that. The spirit of the crying woman is the most regularly spotted ghost in St Pancras. In 1998, a man spotted a distressed woman crying into her hands. When he went over to ask if she was okay, he passed straight through her. This is just one of many sightings of the crying girl. Some say they've seen a woman with long brown hair screaming with her arms outstretched, and when they go to assist her, she simply isn't there. Now, I've been through that area of the building several times, and there's a little memorial to the victims, which is very sweet. I've never seen a ghost, but I have to admit there is a kind of stomach-wrenching sadness that fills me every time I walk down that corridor. Coming into number 7, we have the Phantom Bus. Around Cambridge Gardens in Ladbroke Grove, there is a rogue number 7 bus that haunts the streets at 1:15 AM. A night bus. Hands up all the night bus warriors of London town out there. Oh my god, the night bus. In the days before the late night tube, the night bus was the only way to get home, and honestly, it was a pretty savage place to be at 1 AM. Anyway, I digress. The only savage in this story is the Phantom Bus. The otherworldly apparition came about in 1930 when it caused a nasty accident. A driver was motoring down the road when he swerved to avoid something oncoming. The man then crashed his car into a wall and died as his car burst into flames. Eyewitnesses say they saw a bright red London double-decker bus with the number 7 on it hurtling down the road. The dead driver swerved out of its path. Police investigated, but they found no scheduled bus at that time of night, and the area didn't have a number 7 bus on its route at all. More accidents happened in the same spot with remarkably similar eyewitness accounts. Same number 7 bus, same out of control careering down the road. Okay, I love this one at number 6. We have Sir Francis Bacon and a half-plucked chicken. This won't be the last time that Highgate is mentioned on this list. The ghost of famous English philosopher Sir Francis Bacon is said to haunt Pond Square in Highgate, North London. His ghost is accompanied by a chicken, because why not? Now, Sir Francis Bacon died after catching pneumonia when he tried to stuff a chicken with snow in the street in order to experiment with freezing as a way of preserving meat. meat. The events of the 17th century clearly had an impact on the area, and many people have reported seeing bacon and a fowl running amok around Pond Square. Most famously, a couple in the 1970s were snogging on a bench when their kissing sesh was disturbed by a rogue chicken that seemed to disappear into a wall. Coming into number 5, we have the headless ghost of Tower Green. Tower Green is within the Tower of London, and to be honest, the ghost of the Tower of London could make up the entire 10-point list. So I'm gonna go and keep it simple with a lesser known ghost of the castle. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Lady Margaret Pole, the 8th Countess of Salisbury. It seems her son offended King Henry VIII, but he was out of the country, so he exacted his revenge on his mother instead. Lady Pole was 70 years old at the time, which was pretty ancient in Tudor days. On her execution day, she refused to lay her head upon the block, so the executioner swung his axe at her instead. Unfortunately, instead of lopping off her head, he hit her in the shoulder. She ran around screaming and pouring blood until he finally caught her. Now, it took him 11 blows to finally finish her off, and actually, it's pretty gruesome. It's said on the anniversary of her death, May the 27th, 1541, her ghost runs around screaming around the area, enacting her last moments on Earth. Coming into number 4, we have the spirits of Epping Forest. Ooh, Epping Forest, you would not catch me there alone at night, it's pretty murdery. The forest is haunted by such a large number of spooks, it's hard to pick just one. One of the more famous ghosts is highwayman Dick Turpin, who used to use the forest as a base for his illicit activities. The ghost of the criminal, eventually hanged for his years of wrongdoing, presented himself to ghost hunter Yvette Fielding in an area he used to hide out in the forest. In the 1960s, there were reports of ghostly figures emerging from a pond in the forest near Lindsay Street. Others say a pond deeper in the forest draws in potential suicide victims, as it was once the scene of a murder-suicide between two young lovers over 300 years ago. Another spirit is said to draw cars up a road on a hill just outside the forest. Coming into number 3, we have 50 Berkeley Square. 50 Berkeley Square is supposed to be the most haunted house in Britain, let alone London. The home dates back to the late 18th century and has a very haunted attic. It is said that a young woman threw herself out of the attic window after being abused by her uncle for years. Her spirit is said to take the form of a brown mist and is capable of scaring people to death. Between 1859 and early 1870s, a recluse called Mr. Myers lived and died in the house as he went slowly mad. People who have stayed at the property, including Lord Lyttelton, have claimed to have seen the ghost aplenty. Lyttelton even shot at one once. The house was a particular focal point in the late 1800s when Mayfair magazine ran a piece about a maid who went mad and died after working at the house. Also, there were stories of 2 sailors dying emerging at the property. The property is currently the oldest unaltered building in London, and with private owners, little is known about the latest hauntings. Coming into number 2, we have the most haunted theatre in London. The stories of the Theatre Royal Drury Lane have gone on for centuries. There are so many urban legends here. Now, the theatre is the oldest theatre in London as well as being the most haunted. It's been on the same spot since the 16th century, but it has burned down twice. Now, theatres are highly emotional places and are regularly at the centre of hauntings. Drury Lane has a whole bunch of ghosts, including a mysterious man in grey, a famous clown Joseph Grimaldi, pantomime dame Dan Leno, and some say that Madame Two Swords herself sits in the aisle cradling a waxwork head. I worked in London theatres, and a number of my friends at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane had experienced the man in grey firsthand. Now, apparently, seeing him on opening night of a new show is supposed to be very good luck, and he reportedly appeared on the first night of Miss Saigon, one of the most successful musicals to ever run on the West End and Broadway. The man in grey loves the theatre and is said to regularly shush noisy patrons. The ghost of the clown is less helpful, however. He's said to kick actors on the stage. Get out of here, Grimaldi. Finally, at number 1, we have possibly the most talked about London legend. We have the urban legend of the Highgate Vampire. The Highgate Vampire is one of the most popular and credible London urban legends. Practically everyone who lives in the city or has ever lived in the city knows about it. The Highgate Vampire caused a media stir in the 1970s when there was a slew of supernatural activity in Highgate Cemetery in London. The legend started on a cold December night when occult lovers spent the night in a cemetery and glimpsed a grey figure. Since then, a spectre has been seen stalking the graveyard at night. The story goes that the occult lover awoke asleep sleeping spirit of a Romanian vampire. The vampire was a medieval nobleman who practiced dark magic in medieval times, and his body was brought to England in a coffin in the early 18th century and then buried in Highgate Cemetery. The story and sightings led to mass media coverage, and mobs of vampire hunters swarmed the gates of the graveyard. It seems the ghostly apparition may live on. The so-called vampire was last spotted in 2016 and was possibly caught on camera in 2012.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Tulip Staircase Ghost. In 1966, Reverend R.W. Hardy was visiting the Queen's House in Greenwich. There was an old staircase there known as the Tulip Staircase. He decided to take a picture of it. It wasn't until he got his photo developed that he saw this, a figure scaling the stairs that had not been there when he took the picture. The strange hooded figure became known as the Tulip Staircase Ghost. Ghost hunters have now been visiting the site for over 50 years. Many of them have reported strange results from their recording equipment. Looking at that picture, even the most skeptical of people have admitted that the hands and the body do look like an actual person, albeit one that's perhaps locked between the two worlds of the afterlife and the Tulip Staircase. Coming at number 9 now, we have Spring-Heeled Jack. In October 1837, a girl called Mary Stevens was said to have been walking through Clapham Common in England when a strange figure leapt at her from a dark alleyway. He began to kiss her face while ripping her clothes off with his claws before fleeing the scene. The next day, the same figure caused a carriage to crash. This time they said that he breathed fire, laughed, and then jumped over a 9-foot high wall. Locals began to call him Spring-Heeled Jack. The following year, a woman called Jane Aslop said that she answered the door to a man claiming to be a police officer who said they caught Spring-Heeled Jack. She brought him a candle, at which point he tore his cloak off, vomited blue and white flames from his mouth while his eyes resembled red balls of fire. He tore at her with his long claws, but she managed to escape. It's been over 180 years since then, but that hasn't stopped the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack from living on. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Highgate Vampire. In 1969, a man called David Farrant reported seeing a ghostly grey figure walking through the Highgate Cemetery. As more reports poured in, another man called Sean Manchester stepped forward to say he knew what the sightings were of, a vampire. Eventually, people began to believe this. Local people went hunting around the cemetery looking for the vampire, armed with crucifixes and heavy wooden stakes. Sean claimed a sleepwalking girl had actually led him to the graves one night to kill the monster. He and David became convinced that a group of Satanists were using the cemetery to summon demons and that the vampire was just one of many. Although the media frenzy has died down now over the years, many locals still swear there's something not right about that cemetery, and so the legend of the vampire lives on. Coming at number 7 now, we have the Screams of the Dead. In 1943, Bethnal Green in East London experienced one of the worst tragedies of World War II. It wasn't from bombs, but panic. During air raid siren tests, civilians on their way to shelter in the tube station began to converge on the same entrance all at once. In their panic to get down, some people tripped and then a stampede began. People fell to the ground and were crushed. 173 people were trampled to death, including at least 41 children. Locals say the place never really healed. They report hearing women screaming and children crying in the station and a deep sense of dread in the night air. Moving on to number 6 now, we have a weird one. It's called the Frittening. This was the name given to a creature that's said to live on the Isle of Shetland in Scotland. Locals claim that it's a boneless, blob-like beast that will scare anyone who sees it to death. Those that caught a glimpse and lived to tell the tale described it as looking like a bag of wet sand or wool. Others said it was an armless, legless, ghastly, wet, vile thing that pressed its lidless eye against their windows. I'm a little bit worried because that description kind of fits me if I'm having a rough morning. Next up at number 5 now, we have Netta Fornario. This woman from London was said to be a member of the occult. In the summer of 1929, at the age of 30, she left London for Iona, a small Scottish island steeped in folklore. She joined a secretive occult group known for their ritual magic, tarot cards, mysticism, telepathy, and a deep interest in fairies. After some months, her landlady found her one morning in a frenzy, packing her luggage. She told the landlady landlady that she needed to return to London immediately, as several members of the cult were attacking her telepathically. The landlady said she would have to wait as the boat didn't run on Sundays. Netta became enraged and retreated to her room. She eventually calmed down and said she would stay and that she was going out for a walk. When she didn't return by nightfall, the landlady raised the alarm. After 2 days, a search party found her body. She was found lying on top of some turf that had a cross carved into it. She was wearing only a thin black cloak. The doctor who examined her body could not find any cause of death. Her body was in a fine physical condition. It was just dead. Officials put it down to exposure to the elements on the cold Scottish island. Others believe she was killed by a psychic telepathic attack generated by someone miles away. Moving on to number 4 now, we have the Boggart. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you may have heard of the Boggart before, but did you know it's based on a real legend? Boggart Hole Clough is a 190-acre area of ancient woodland that is said to be haunted by a boggart, a mischievous spirit that typically lives in fields and marshes but can also be found indoors. They are usually known for their harmless peskiness, turning milk sour or making objects disappear, but some people say they have a much darker side. They are often blamed for the abduction of children. The one that gives its name to Boggart Hole Clough is claimed to be notorious for this. It's been said that it was so active once that a farmer and his family were driven from their home for fear of the boggart stealing their children. Next at number 3 now, we have the figure in the studio. In an interview with a Londonist, a couple of radio hosts from Resonance FM in London told a story that has sparked a modern day urban legend, the figure in the studio. They said that one day while working in the radio station, they saw an evil spirit, more malevolent than anything you can imagine. It was just standing there at night in their offices watching them. It looked like a shadow with angry red rimmed eyes and strange looking dark teeth. Just before they called out to it, the spirit smiled, revealing its long teeth, and then it disappeared. Many local ghost hunters are convinced that they have discovered a new spirit and that this won't be the last haunting of the figure in the studio. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the Devil's Bridge. According to legend, the devil visited Ceredigion in Wales in the 11th century after hearing about its breathtaking scenery. Yes, even the devil appreciates a good view. While there, he struck a bargain with a local woman whose cow was stranded across the river. In a bid to buy her soul, the devil said he'd build her a bridge in exchange for the soul of the first living thing that crossed it. He was obviously hoping for hers. When the bridge was built, the woman threw a loaf of bread across which her dog chased. The devil couldn't take the dog's soul. He was said to be so embarrassed and ashamed that he never returned to Wales again. In the village of Devil's Bridge today, there are 3 crossings across that river. The oldest is said to be the one built by Satan himself. And finally, at number 1 now, we have Jack the Ripper. This is arguably the most famous British urban legend of all time. Not really sure how I managed to miss it out in the last video. He was an unidentified Victorian serial killer, also known as the Whitechapel Murderer, because of the area of London in which he killed people. He was thought to have targeted female prostitutes in slums by slashing open their throats. He removed the internal organs from at least 3 of his victims, which made authorities think they were dealing with someone with some knowledge of surgery. The police began to receive letters from a writer or writers claiming to be the murderer. One of them even came with a kidney said to belong to one of the victims. The murders were never solved, and the legend of Jack the Ripper continued to grow. There are now over 100 hypotheses about who the real killer was, but the story still remains shrouded in...
Alright, coming in at number 10, we have the death of Annie Bjorsen. Annie was a 30-year-old Swedish woman who was found washed up on the coast of Prestwick, West Scotland in December 2005. Police ruled the death suicide by self-drowning, but the majority of the people out there who have looked into the case absolutely do not agree. There is some truly weird factors surrounding the last day of her life that simply can't be ignored. For one, Annie lived in Edinburgh and travelled 80 miles to Prestwick Airport where she tried to withdraw cash, but her bank card was declined. She was seen acting suspiciously on airport CCTV, appearing to run across the terminal. She looked distressed and confused. She then made her way to the town, but what happened to her there is unknown. During her autopsy, coroners found bruises on her body that appeared to have been inflicted while she was still alive. After she was found, her hair was cut and thrown away, which really isn't normal practice. Authorities seem reluctant to provide forensic examinations into her death, death, and when her family logged into her email, they saw that all of her messages had been deleted, as too had her entire 2005 phone records. Family members then themselves started experiencing internet interruptions when they logged onto their own emails, and they were on the receiving end of silent calls. In 2013, Scottish Parliament were presented with 3,000 signatures of those wanting a full and further investigation. Coming into number 9, we have Gilmerton Cove. In the village of Gilmerton, now a suburb of Edinburgh around 4 miles away from the city centre, there is a cottage hiding a pretty big secret. From the outside, the house is unassuming, but inside the cottage is the entrance to a network of tunnels, passageways and chambers that expand underneath the village, and nobody really knows why they're there or indeed who built them. The theories of course do include the occult, the suggestion it could have been a hideaway for witches on trial. Others say it could have been an illegal drinking den. Wilder theories, of course, say murder. A murder passage for murderers. Who knows? Coming into number 8, we have the Lighthouse Keepers. Among the remote Outer Hebrides off the west coast of Scotland, there is an even more remote collection of islands called the Flannan Islands. Now on these islands sits the lighthouse of Llyn Moor. The islands were named after an Irish bishop who built a chapel there, but would famously never stay there at night, fearful of the old Scottish spirits that haunt the lands. The area was so remote and uninhabited at the turn of the 20th century that only the lighthouse keepers lived there. On the frosty Boxing Day night of the year 1900, a ship was arriving to bring a new lighthouse keeper to join the 3 already living there. As they came to shore, they were surprised to see that there was no light coming from the lighthouse. When they went to investigate, they couldn't see any signs of the other lighthouse keepers. They were, however, confronted with a very strange scene. Meals were half eaten in the kitchen, and a chair had been upturned as if the inhabitants had fled very quickly. Dramatically, it also seemed as if the clock in the room had stopped. It was assumed that the other people had been blown off cliffs in a storm and drowned, but their bodies had never been found. It doesn't explain the half-eaten meals as well and the clocks, like what's going on here? Coming in at number 7, we have the Pictish Stones. Stones have been uncovered across Scotland, revealing an ancient civilization called the Picts. Now these people lived in Scotland between 300 and 843 AD. The stones displayed symbols which at first historians and archaeologists alike thought were just simple symbology, but it seems that actually they're an ancient language, a bit like Egyptian hieroglyphics. At the moment we have absolutely no idea what the stones are telling us, but a team of language experts are working on deciphering the code. What it might reveal, we simply don't know. It could be terrifying. Coming into number 6, we have the Unknown Ship. High up in the remote Scottish Highlands is the village of Drumburg. The coastline is rugged but regularly used for fishing. In the 1900s, fishermen found an old sunken ship, although there are no historical records of a ship ever floundering in this area. The wreck is thought to be hundreds of years old, and only a wooden hull and 3 cannons remain. The wreck can't be raised for further examination because researchers are concerned it would disintegrate. As a result, we're simply left to wonder what happened. Coupled with the many reports of ghosts haunting the cliffs of the West Highlands, we can only imagine what perilous end the ship came to. We have a mid-list treat right here, one of the more famous of our mysteries. At number 5, we have our mate, the Loch Ness Monster. This is one of the most enduring Scottish mysteries of them all. How could we fail to mention this one? So the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster has been one of the most famous Scottish urban legends of all time. Everyone around the world has heard of the Loch Ness Monster. Now Loch Ness is a body of water between Fort William and Inverness in Scotland, and it has long been the site of otherworldly discussion. Before the enduring legend of the Loch Ness Monster began, people thought that the water was home to otherworldly mysteries. Indeed, a monster was sighted in the area in 565 AD. The legend became truly popular in the 1930s with a slew of sightings and of course the infamous Sturgeon's photograph of Nessie. In 1938, Nessie was allegedly caught on film, and in 1954 detected by sonar. Over the past 90 years there have been a vast number of sightings, but of course, there is no irrefutable proof. Nonetheless, people are convinced that there is something living in the lake. Is there a wider mystery here, or is the legend of Nessie just a story made up for the tourists? Coming into number 4, we have Peter Gibb and the Mull Plain Mystery. On Christmas Eve of 1975, 55-year-old Peter Gibb and his 32-year-old girlfriend Felicity Granger were dining on the Scottish island of Mull. After dinner, Gibb abruptly decided that he would fly his plane in the dark. Now, this was following a particularly boozy session, so it was somewhat ill-advised. Granger held torches for Gibb as he took off in his Cessna plane. Now, this was against the better advice of his fellow dining partners. Some swear they saw a second person holding a torch with Granger on the runway, although she claims she was the only one there guiding the plane. Gibbs took off, and sadly, he never returned. His body was found 4 months later on a nearby hillside, but it had already been searched for his body in the months prior. The autopsy suggested that he died of exposure to the elements. He wasn't injured, save for a small cut on his leg. His plane was nowhere to be seen, which was really strange indeed, because the way he was found suggested that actually he managed to successfully land the plane rather than crash it. Fast forward 11 years and a plane matching his description was found in the sea between Mull and mainland Scotland, but this plane had crashed very, very hard. He would likely have died on impact or been seriously injured. And also, it was in the ocean. Gibb didn't have a parachute, so jumping out of the plane would have been a death wish. There are a lot of unanswered questions here, and a number of people absolutely suspect foul play. For now though, it's still a mystery. Coming into number 3, we have Bible John. Scotland had their very own Zodiac-style killer in the 1960s, and we are still none the wiser as to the identity of the murderer today. The killer picked young women between the ages of 25 and 32 at the Barrowland Ballroom in Glasgow, Scotland. The murderer took 3 victims after dancing with them at the ballroom. The final victim, Helen Paddock, had introduced a strange man to her sister, who had claimed to be her dance partner. Now, Bible John got his nickname as Helen's sister Jean said that her companion had been called John, and he cited verses from the Old Testament. He also referred to Glasgow as an adulterous den of iniquity, so pretty dramatic. He was profiled as being around 5'10", a sharpish dresser with red hair between the ages of 25 to 30. Sadly, he's never been found. Coming into number 2, we have the miniature coffins of Arthur's Seat. It was the summer of 1836 when a group of young lads were out hunting rabbits. A small cave captured their attention and they decided to investigate. However, instead of finding rabbits for supper, they found 17 3.7-inch coffins arranged in rows. Curiosity overtook the boys and they decided to look inside the tiny coffins. Inside they found 17 dressed wooden dolls with open eyes staring back at them. The boys told locals about their findings, and interest in the mysterious tombs grew. From investigation, it seems like the coffins had been placed at different intervals in time over the past few years. The media started calling them the fairy coffins, and rumours as to their purpose went wild. Some people said that they were memorials for murder victims, but the most popular rumour was witchcraft. The Scotsman, the oldest and most famous newspaper in Scotland at the time, wrote, "Our own opinion would be, had we not some years ago abjured witchcraft and demonology, that there are still some of the weird sisters hovering around the cairn or the windy gowl. They may retain their ancient power to work the spells of death by entombing the likeness of those they wish to destroy." Pretty freaky. To this day, we still don't know who put them there and what purpose they served. Finally, coming in at number 1 of our scary Scottish mysteries, we have the Glasgow Effect. Also known as the Riddle of Clyde, the Glasgow Effect refers to a baffling mortality rate in the Scottish city. Let me put it this way, average life expectancy in war-torn Iraq is 67 years old. In North Korea, it's 71, but in Glasgow city centre, it is just 54 years of age. Glasgow has the lowest average death age of the UK, and indeed wider Europe. The statistics have often been pegged down to poverty, which increases the likelihood of smoking, drugs and alcohol abuse. However, there are other similar areas of Great Britain with similar levels of poverty, yet people on average are living 15 years longer or more. Now, research is still rendering more questions, and we still aren't sure why people in Glasgow are dying so much younger than people who live in war zones. What's going on?
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the corpse train. Now, according to London folklore, in the early 1900s there was a train that ran underneath the city and it was only for dead people. Back then, London's hospitals and morgues were struggling to deal with the vast amount of people that were dying from poverty and disease. They decided to transport the bodies out of the city, but knew that they couldn't do it overground without disturbing a lot of people. So they used an existing train line to load the bodies onto. The train ran just the other side of a wall from the normal daily service, where unsuspecting Londoners were getting on and off their trains unaware of the nearby bodies. Next up at number 9 now, we have the suicide pool. This one comes from Epping Forest near Essex. The story goes that years ago, a young couple in love were followed to a pond in the forest by the girl's father. When the couple finally embraced, the father leapt from the trees to confront the boy. The fight got out of hand and the father ended up killing the boy in a rage at the edge of the pool. The waters then turned black. Wildlife that was touching the water died instantly. In the years that followed, bodies started to appear in the water. First it was an old woman, then a young one with her young child beside her. They say the pool drew them into their death and that the pool is still out there in the forest somewhere waiting for its next victim. Next up at number 8 now, we have Annie. This one comes from Edinburgh, Scotland. In the old town there lies a street known as Mary King's Close. It's steeped in myths and legends of hauntings and murders. In 1990, a psychic called Aiko Gibo visited and felt a small hand touch hers. She said that she then made contact with the spirit of a dead child called Annie who had died in a plague hundreds of years ago and had lost her doll. The psychic then went to a nearby shop and brought back a Barbie doll for her. Now since then, visitors leave dolls for Annie and a mountain of them has built up in the dark. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the Faceless Woman. This one comes from the borough of Barking in London. There you can find Beacon Tree Station, home to the Faceless Woman. The most famous sighting of her happened in 1992. A station supervisor reported that on one night he heard the handle of his office door rattle. Outside on the platform stood a woman. She had blonde hair, she wore a very pale dress and just stared into the distance. The supervisor approached her, but as he reached out, she turned to him only to reveal she had no face, just darkness where there should be one. Local ghost hunters claim that she is the victim of a train crash that happened there in 1958 which killed 10 people. At number 6 now, we have the Beast. England's Hackney Marshes is known for its sprawling woodland and boggy reed marshes often covered in swirling fog, the perfect setting for this urban legend. The story goes that in 1980, 2 bear carcasses were found in the river. They had been decapitated. People started speculating about who or what could cut a bear's head clean off its shoulders. Then a year later, 4 boys were taking a walk along the marsh one winter morning when they saw it through the trees. They described it as a giant, great, growling, hairy thing. As soon as it saw them, it reared up on its back legs and let out a deafening roar. The boys ran, but the story remains always in the back of people's minds as they trudged through the marsh. We're returning now to the London Underground for our number 5 with The Crying Girl. On November 18th, 1987, a match was dropped on an escalator at London's King Cross station. A fire quickly spread into the nearby ticket office, which resulted in the death of 31 people. In the years since then, passengers have reported seeing a girl who died around the station. She has long brown hair, wears jeans and a t-shirt, and is always crying. Some people have even reported hearing her sobs while smelling smoke coming out from the escalators. Back to Scotland now for our number 4 with Sawney Bean. This is the gruesome tale of Alexander Sawney Bean, a man who was said to be the head of a Scottish clan of cannibals in medieval times. According to legend, the group was made up of his wife, their 14 children and 32 grandchildren, some of whom were born through incest. They lived in a cave by the water and would ambush people on the road at night. They would bring their bodies back to the cave to then dismember and eat them. Any leftovers were pickled in a jar for later. When King James VI of Scotland eventually heard of these murders, he led a manhunt to capture them. The clan was caught and then executed. Some people say you can still find the cave along the Benane Head area of Scotland. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Cane Hill. Some say this is one of the most haunted places in England. It was a mental asylum for over 100 years from 1882 to 1991. It built up a reputation for abandoning some of its patients, hiding them away from the public eye and never truly helping them. Some people say the patients who died left their energy behind there because of their tortured lives. The building was gutted by a mysterious fire in 2010. Perhaps the scariest stories of all are of the faces appearing by the burnt out windows. Next up at number 2 now, we have the House of the Screaming grinning skull. This one comes from Bettiscombe Manor in Dorset, England. The legend goes that in 1830, a man lived there called John Frederick Pinney. He had a slave that he had brought back from the Caribbean island of Nevis. The man became ill, and on his deathbed, he swore he would never rest unless his body was returned home to Nevis. Pinney refused to pay for that expense, and when he died, he had the man buried in the local graveyard. After that, ill fortune began to plague the village for months. Screams and cries were heard from the cemetery. At the manor house, windows rattled and doors kept slamming. The body was dug up and brought to the manor house, where today only the skull remains, where it's said to haunt the manor, but the village remains safe. And finally, at number 1 now, we have the Hellhounds. Dartmoor is a vast, rocky, windy and mysterious part of England. It's popular among tourists, but everyone who goes there is aware of the legend of the Hellhounds. It's said that a pack of these ghost dogs wanders the moors at night, preying on sheep, and they're not afraid of humans. They've often been described as cat-like, but with the frame of a bear, and very fast. There have been pictures and film taken of them over the years that claim to show glimpses of these hellhounds in action. Many of the locals don't even need that though. They've heard the stories handed down from generation to generation. Some of them even say they've seen the hounds with their own 2 eyes. Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui. Amphir Liath Moor is the Gaelic name of a mythical creature known as the Big Grey Man, who is said to dwell at the summit of Scotland's Ben Macdui mountain. Over the years, many climbers have felt his presence or even seen him, a lumbering giant that skulks in the thick fog of the mountain peak. He's often described as being very large, sometimes about 10 feet tall when standing completely upright. Short hairs cover his whole body, especially thick on his broad shoulders. His arms are also said to swing wildly when he's sighted. Sightings of this creature have gone back for centuries, but the first credible account came from Professor Norman Colley in 1891. The day he saw it, he made a note in his journal saying, "I was returning home from a calm on the summit in the mist when I began to think I heard something else other than my own footsteps. For every few steps I took, I heard a crunch, and then another crunch, as if someone was walking after me, but taking footsteps 3 or 4 times the length of my own." His account ends up going into much more detail, but for many people, this account and a few others are more than enough to convince them of the Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui. Moving on to number 9 now, we have Cathedral House Hotel. This building in Glasgow was originally built in 1877 as a halfway house for prisoners who had been released from the nearby Duke Street prison. That prison was the site of many executions over the years, including 12 in the 20th century. The last person to be executed in Scotland, Susan Newell, was hanged at the prison in October 1923 after being found guilty of strangling a paperboy. In the years since the last execution, locals swear that the spirits of the executed have made their home in the nearby Cathedral House Hotel. Some say they have felt a ghostly presence brush up against them on the staircase. There have also been several reports of 2 ghostly children being heard on the top floor of the hotel, and items of furniture moving of their own accord. In 2005, the Ghost Finders Scotland group conducted a thorough investigation using high-tech equipment. They recorded unusual EMF and tri-field readings, along with light orbs and various other anomalies appearing on both video footage and still photographs. Moving on to number 8 now, we have the Well of the Dead. Nice name. Many Scots will be familiar with the Jacobite Rising of 1746. On April 16th of that year, the Scottish forces fighting for independence from the British were defeated, suffering heavy losses. Many lost their lives on the fields of Culloden. Legend says that birds no longer sing above the boggy land where Jacobites made their final stand. That rhymed, that wasn't intentional. Locals have witnessed a tartan-wearing spirit wandering through the moor there. Those who get close enough manage to hear it muttering one single word: defeated. Every single year on April 16th, the anniversary of the battle, they say you can still hear the clashing of swords and the sound of men dying, locked in their bloody battle for eternity. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Jenny with the Iron Teeth. So we talked about Gorbals in the last video, the Glasgow neighbourhood that's home to Glasgow's necropolis of sorts, where an estimated 50,000 people are buried. As such, it's not too surprising that the area has made it into one of our videos for a second time now, but now it's for a different reason. In 1954, a policeman responded to reports that hundreds of children had descended upon the cemetery. When he arrived, the children had begun to disperse. He questioned them, and they swore that 2 children had just been devoured by the Gorbals vampire. Some of you may remember the Gorbals vampire from the last video. Well, the locals didn't believe the children, but not for the reason you might think. They claimed the children had actually seen Jenny with the iron teeth. It had been many years since they had heard that name. She is said to be a demonic hag who roamed Glasgow Green in the 19th century, dragging children to her lair with great big metal jaws. The reports made people fear that she had returned, and in the years since then, perhaps she's never left. Coming in number 6 now, we have Netta Fornario. This is perhaps one of the strangest missing person cases I've ever heard of. Netta Fornario was a member of an occult group called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They practiced ritual magic, tarot cards, mysticism, and held a solid belief in the powers of telepathy. On top of all that, Netta also had a personal interest in fairies. In 1929, Netta went to the small Scottish island of Iona. Nobody is quite sure why she did it. She arrived at a local inn and spent most of her days wandering the tiny island alone. After a few weeks, her innkeeper woke up to find that Netta was in a frenzy of packing her luggage to leave. Netta said that she needed to leave right away, as several individuals were attacking her telepathically. The innkeeper told her it would be impossible to leave that day, as the boat to the mainland did not run on Sundays. Netta left the room in a rage, returning a few hours later to say that she had decided to stay on Iona after all. She left on one of her walks that night, but when she didn't return later on, her innkeeper raised the alarm. After a 2-day search for her, they found Netta's dead body. A cross had been cut into the turf with a dagger, and Netta's body was lying on top of it. A doctor could not determine how or when she died. Many people believe that she was mentally ill and suicidal, but others argue that she was the victim of some really dark magic. Next up at number 5 now, we have Provan Hall. Many people in Glasgow will know this as one of the oldest buildings in the city. It was built as a hunting lodge for the bishops of Glasgow in 1471. That's more than 20 years before Christopher Columbus set sail. For all you history buffs out there trying to get your head around the dates, it's a pretty old building. It has played host to some distinguished guests as well, including Mary Queen of Scots and her father, King James V. Ghosts have been reported at the hall ever since those days. Locals say they've seen spirits of murderers and also their victims. The master bedroom is said to be haunted by a man with a dagger. They say that in the 19th century he came home from 2 years at war to find his wife had had a baby with another man. In a fit of rage, he stabbed her to death and then slit his own throat. Another less violent ghost that's been seen is that of Reston Mathers. He was a previous owner of the hall who is often seen on the staircase. He died there in 1934 after breathing problems and is said to always be dressed in a black bowler hat and sporting a bright white beard. Next up, number 4 now, we have the Green Lady of Crathis Castle. Many people know of the Green Lady of Crathis Castle, a forlorn spirit that has been seen by an alarming amount of people over the years. The castle was built in the 16th century, and despite its grand size, the Green Lady is only ever seen in one room. She paces back and forth in front of the fireplace there, sometimes cradling an infant in her arms. Apparently, even Queen Victoria herself saw the spectre while staying in the castle one night. Some say that in life the apparition was a servant girl who fell pregnant out of wedlock and mysteriously disappeared soon after. For a while, this was just dismissed as nonsense, but in the 1800s, a grisly discovery was made. While renovating a fireplace, some workmen uncovered the skeletal remains of a woman and child. Even that story has now been lost in the sands of time, but the legend of the Green Lady lives on. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the Dalmarnock Bridge suicide ghost. Even without the ghost, the Gothic style and age of this bridge leaves a stark image in visitors' minds. There has been a bridge on this site going way back to 1821, spanning across the River Clyde. It's also known for a harrowing suicide story. They say that years ago, a man jumped to his death from the bridge. He was 30 years old with short hair, wearing a blue 3/4 length coat and black trousers. In the years since then, many people have reported seeing his ghostly apparition jump to its death over and over again. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the Kelpsie. These are perhaps some of the most feared and famous creatures in Scottish folklore. Most accounts describe these creatures as shapeshifters that often take the form of a horse. When they appear in human male form, they are often very hairy. They jump out out at lone travellers on deserted roads and crush their victims to death. If they appear in human female form, their behaviour is altogether different. They take the form of a beautiful woman and lure men to their deaths in the water, much like the sirens that we've talked about in other cultures' urban legend videos. In horse form, they're perhaps even more dangerous though. It's said that they entice people to climb on their back for a ride, only to drown them. What's even more twisted is that they apparently target children in particular. Many centuries ago, people in Scotland would be wary of dark or white ponies that appeared to be lost. They feared they were kelpies that would take them to a watery grave. One way to spot a kelpie from a normal horse was that kelpies had dripping manes, a sign that they had recently come from water. When a kelpie's tail entered water, it made a sound like thunder, a sure sign to stay indoors as a kelpie was on the prowl. And finally, at number 1 now, we have the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Mystery. These isles are a group of uninhabited rocks off the coast of mainland Scotland. One of the islands is called Llyn Moor and features a grass hill at its highest point. On top of that lies Flannan Isles Lighthouse. A year after it was built, on December 7th, 1900, the new lighthouse keepers arrived. They were Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall and James Ducat. The inspector made sure they were okay and then left. Soon after, the island became enveloped in a thick, rolling fog. The inspectors couldn't see the lighthouse from the mainland because of this fog. A ship that went by a week later reported that the lighthouse was not shining its light. After a full 3 weeks, the lighthouse had still not been seen and the men had not returned from their rotation on the island. A rescue ship found that the island was empty. The lighthouse was locked. The clock on the wall had stopped and there was a cooked meal just sat on the table. The last entry in the log had been made almost 2 weeks before. Authorities concluded they were swept away by a storm, but locals had maintained something supernatural happened on that island and that the fog had something to do with it.
Starting us off for number 10 is the Wild Hunt, and this one is borderline ancient. The first account of the Wild Hunt was back in 1127 when a historical document revealed this. Many men both saw and heard a great number of huntsmen hunting. The huntsmen were black, huge and hideous and rode on black horses and on black he-goats, and their hounds were jet black with eyes like saucers and horrible, end quote. Apparently the huntsmen were sinners while they were alive, and so the nightly exercise was just part of their punishment, and if them on their own isn't scary enough, they were also accompanied by demons. Lone travelers would get taken by the whole group of them and dragged to the literal pits of hell, which I'm not here for, by the way. I don't know about you personally, but personally that's not my vibe. Personally, I don't speak for everyone. Coming in at number 9 is Red Cap. So a bit of a history lesson for you. England and Scotland were at war for far too long back in the day, and that made the Anglo-Scottish border a dangerous place to be. Raiders from both countries would go and commit crimes on the other side of the border and come back and not be punished for it. And with horrible people, there are also horrible creatures. Red Cap was an evil creature that took the form of an old man with iron shoes. He had long pointed teeth, and you already know that doesn't sit well with me, red eyes, talon-like fingers and long hair. And the cherry on top was his red hat. Red Cap would ravage all the abandoned castles along the border, hunting for bodies left behind from the war, and use their blood to dye his cap. And if he didn't find any bodies, he'd just wait around and kill an unlucky passerby. Apparently the only way to defeat him is to either brandish a crucifix or recite biblical scripture, after which he should scream and disappear into a ball of fire, and if he doesn't, well, don't quote me on that. No cap. I had to do it. Come on, this is me, I had to do it. Chris is like, yeah. At number 8, we have the Vampires of Burton-on-Trent. No folklore video is ever complete without the mention of some kind of vampires or another. According to an old Anglo-Saxon chronicle, there were 2 peasants in Burton-on-Trent that had died, yet were seen walking around town with their coffins on their backs. They would knock on people's doors, calling out their names, and whoever was called upon would very quickly fall sick and die. Now, suspicious, the villagers decided to open up the coffins of the 2 men to see the corpses were completely undecayed and their mouths were covered with cloths drenched in blood. Being like, absolutely not, the villagers then beheaded the corpses, cut their hearts out and burned the bodies. Good going, guys, I would have done the same. 2 black birds were seen emerging from the fire, and after that point the men were never seen again. I honestly feel like Twilight and the Vampire Diaries has really ruined vampires for me. I always have to remind myself they're not like Edward Cullen or the Salvatore brothers, they're like this. Don't fall in love with them. It's not cute. Let's not romanticize vampires. Let's cancel that culture right now. starting now. Filling on our 7th slot is Cutty Dyer. Now the legend of Cutty Dyer goes way back to at least 1879. That's the first time this creature was talked about in local publications, and everyone had already been it for a while. This creature is said to be an ogre or a water sprite that stalked the stream of the River Yo or Ashburn, depending on the version of the story that you hear. The legend originated in the town of Ashburton, where he supposedly lived under the King's Bridge. Isn't it usually trolls that live under the bridge? What's going on? Cutty Dyer would wait around stalking children and any drunkards that came by. He'd then pounce on them, drowning them and then gorging on their blood. That's appetizing. Parents used to tell his story to their kids, kind of like an ode to the boogeyman, so they'd stay away from the river. 2 people have even said to have witnessed him standing waist deep in the water, bearing shark teeth and bright glowing red eyes. Now at number 6 is Spring-Heeled Jack. Good old Jack terrorized Victorian Britain, namely London, from the 1830s onwards. First mentioned back in 1810, 3 women reported being attacked by a tall figure wearing a skin-tight black suit, long fingers, red eyes, and metal claws. Apparently he would breathe blue fire into their faces, not burning them, but paralyzing them. A fear was ripe around the city, everyone was bricks, and rightfully so. Many groups even set out to find and kill Jack, but he was never caught. As he gained popularity, his attacks became few and far between, because mans like to keep it low key, you know how it is. Keep it on the down low, on the DL. Like me, I'm a very low key person. Ha! Not. Coming in at number 5 is the Guy Trash. Now already the countryside of Yorkshire is pretty much deserted. The hills have a bunch of footpaths around them that people haven't used in centuries. So because of that and the major lack of signage, it's almost inevitable that one would get lost if travelling the area. The Guy Trash was said to be the most dangerous spirit to live in Yorkshire, and here I'm like, damn, there's more than one spirit? No. Looks wise, it could appear as a black horse or dog or mule with fiery red eyes. It would stalk the footpaths looking for lost travellers and would then lead them further astray, so they'd be even more screwed. Once the traveller was lost with no hope, the Guy Trash would either disappear, leaving them for dead in the dark, or it'd attack them, killing them instantly. At number 4 is the Mermaid of Galloway. First mentioned back in 1810, this tale goes as follows. The Mermaid of Galloway used to live in a breathtaking burn or watercourse, and every night she would sit on a rock and locals would come to her seeking medical advice. Everything was all rainbows and butterflies, but one particular religious woman thought the mermaid was the work of the devil. She ended up pushing the mermaid's rock back into the water, and so when the mermaid appeared the next day, she was so distraught due to the lack of seat. She cried out saying, "You may look to your empty cradle and I'll look to my stain." She said more than that, but it's all in Old English and I didn't even understand it, and I figured you guys wouldn't either, and it simply wasn't relevant. The next day, the religious woman's baby was found dead in its cradle, and the mermaid was never seen again. I mean, never take a woman's seat. You know what they say. No one says that, but I do. Filling on number 3 slot is the Kelpie and the 9 Children. Reverend John Gregerson Campbell was the first person to recount this story in his book Superstitions of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland back in 1900. Legend has it a group of 9 children were roaming around Loch in the Scottish Highlands when they came across a relatively massive, friendly horse. This horse was so big that it had room for all 9 kids to sit on its back, and as soon as they did, the horse galloped off with the kids fearing for their lives. They wanted to jump off but were magically stuck to the horse, and only one of the kids survived because he had a pocket knife in his bag. He cut off his finger that was attached to the horse's mane and watched it dive into a loch, taking its damned cargo with it. None of the kids were seen again, but the following day, guts and other organs were seen floating on the surface of the water. Now at number 2 is the Witch Hare of Cleveland. Not Cleveland, Ohio, we're talking Britain, baby. So this story came to light in the early 19th century. Apparently a group of farmers were out hunting hares when they ran into Nanny X, a well-known witch in the area. She told them that she would tell them where a huge hare was, but that they should not set a black dog on it to kill it. Very specific instructions, but they agreed. She then pointed out a massive brush where of course there was a hare underneath. The hare started running for the hills, and of course the farmers went off after it. Just as the hare finally reached Nanny X's cottage, a massive demon hellhound appeared out of thin air, snapping the hare's legs and taking a massive bite out of its leg. Distraught, the hunters went to her cottage to apologize for letting the black dog get the hair, but when they went inside they found her half dead in bed with a massive lump out of her thigh, exactly where the hellhound had bit the hair. And finally, at number 1 is Black Annis, aka Black Annie. First mentioned in a title deed back in 1764, Annie was a witch that apparently lived in a cave known as Black Annie's Bower. The cave has since been lost to erosion and was supposedly built over for housing after World War I. Looks wise, she had a grimy blue face, long arms that she used to reach through windows and snatch people's kids, and claws made of iron like she could slice a head clean off. Hide your kids, hide your wife. She would go around Leicestershire haunting locals and looking for animals or children to eat. Once she'd kidnapped a child, she would drain them of all their blood, then drape their skin on the tree outside her cave. Then she'd wait for the skin to dry out before adding it to her skirt that was already made from kids of murdered past.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Grim Prophecy. In the village of Llyn stands the Church of St. Digane. There, in the churchyard, lies a yew tree that's said to be over 4,000 years old. Its life began around the time Stonehenge was completed. That's how old it is. Within its old and twisted trunks, locals say a supernatural being lives called Agilstor. According to legend, on Halloween every year, this being emerges to make grim prophecies to those who will hear it. In an ancient Welsh language, he slowly lists the names of the townsfolk who will die in the coming year. There's a cautionary tale of why people should never scoff at this list either. Years ago, there was said to be a local tailor in the town called Seo ap Robert. In the pub one night, he told his friends that he thought the list was just nonsense, and he poured scorn all over Agilstor. His friends challenged him to go to the tree and prove what he was saying. He slammed his empty glass down and marched to the tree, where he heard a deep voice reciting the names of the soon-to-be dead. Then he heard his own. In a panic, he begged Agilstor to stop, telling him he wasn't ready to go yet. But sure enough, within a year, he was dead. Nowadays, many people believe that a person will find their name on the list if they don't take this story seriously. Moving on to number 9 now, we have the Hanging Judge. Judge Jeffreys was a Welsh judge born in Wrexham who took charge of the blood assizes in the 17th century. The gruesome trials involved thousands of people suspected of treason being burned alive at the stake, hanged and beheaded. Some still say he has the blood of many innocent people on his hands, and that these crimes have left him tied to this earth, unable to move on after his death. In recent times, his story has been somewhat forgotten, but then in December 2014, a British ghost hunter called Ian Alderton shared this picture taken in the Ilchester Arms in London. Now he says it shows the ghoulish figure of Judge Jeffreys still wearing his old powdered wig and staring right at the camera. The Ilchester Arms were known to be one of the judge's favourite places to drink. The owner had allowed Ian to investigate the pub for ghosts after she kept hearing voices in her bedroom upstairs. Mrs. Alderton said that she was so disturbed by the noises that at one point she hid under her covers when she heard an old-fashioned male voice say, "Oi, you," just like that apparently. Let's hope she wasn't next in line for one of the judge's trials. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Afanc. In Welsh mythology, this lake monster was one of the most fearsome ever described. His depictions honestly do vary. Some say it looked like a giant crocodile, others a beaver, or even a dwarf-like creature. One thing they all seem to agree on though is that the Afanc is a demon. The Afanc was said to attack and devour anyone who crossed its path. There are many tales of individual encounters with the beast, but one of the most notable was put forth by folklore writer Edward Williams. The legend says that many years ago, a large Afanc thrashed its body in a lake so much that it drowned all the people of Britain except for 2 of them, who went on to be the descendants of everyone in Britain. I come from Britain myself, so hearing this feels like a little bit of a close call. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Cadair Idris. It's one of Snowdonia's most picturesque mountains. In ancient times, they say this was actually the throne of a mythical giant. The area is just covered in legend and history and myths. One story said that the lake by the mountain is actually bottomless and home to a Welsh water dragon that once terrorized the people who lived there. King Arthur himself is said to have been the one who banished it down to the bottomless waters, but not before dragging it up to the top of that mountain and throwing it in. Perhaps the most creepy legend to survive over the centuries is the belief that you should never sleep on the mountainside. Now they say if you do that, you will wake up as one of 3 things. Either you'll go mad, you'll be a talented poet, or you'll never wake up again. I think even poets would not really take the odds on that one. What a strange combination of choices. Moving on to number 6 now, we have the Sker house. That's S-K-E-R, not scare. Anyway, the ghosts of Sker house are legendary in its corner of Wales. For 800 years, it's seen so much violence and bloodshed that locals believe every single inch of the place is haunted. One of the most famous stories revolves around a woman who lived there years ago called Elizabeth Williams. Now, she planned to run away with her lover, a young carpenter and harpist called Thomas Evans, of whom her father did not approve. On the night of their big getaway, they hired a coach and horses to help them escape. When the coach arrived though, William's dogs barked so furiously that they woke up the whole household. Evan panicked and ran away, leaving Elizabeth to face her father's wrath. He locked her up in a room with blocked up windows and forced her to marry someone else against her will. Eventually, she died of a broken heart 9 years later. They say her spirit still haunts Sker house and is felt particularly strongly in the room she was kept prisoner in. In 2002, it's said that a film crew tried to film there during restoration work. A high-pitched noise emanated from the Great Hall, and despite all efforts to trace the source, none could be found. A medium told them they had disturbed something evil. Unable to work with all this noise, they packed up and left as quickly as they could. Coming in at number 5 now, we have Cantagwelod. That's the name of this legendary lost kingdom said to lie below the sea in Cardigan Bay. Story goes that the land was extremely fertile but depended on steep embankments to keep the sea at bay. The actual kingdom was lower than sea level. Special gates were periodically opened up to let the water in slowly for agricultural purposes. The king had left control of these gates to a local man who was always very trustworthy. One night though, he had too much to drink and stumbled to his bed without closing the floodgate. When high tide came, the water poured in. In just a few hours, the entire kingdom was swallowed by the sea, taking the many thousands who lived there with it and the kingdom forever. Next up at number 4 now, we have Devil's Bridge. Ceredigion is a Welsh county that's known as a hub of Welsh culture, attracting many tourists to its scenic towns, castles and beaches. However, in the 11th century, they say it attracted one visitor that nobody wants, the devil himself. The story goes that he went there after hearing about the stunning scenery and wanted to see it for himself. Down by the river, he saw a woman whose cow was stranded on the other side of the water from her. He decided to help her, but for a price. He told the woman that he'd build a bridge for her in exchange for the soul of the first living thing that crossed it. He thought that she would have to cross the bridge first. But when the bridge was built, she threw a loaf of bread over the bridge and her dog chased it. He was so humiliated that he had been outsmarted, he left that very moment, not even stopping to take the dog's soul. These days, the townspeople say the devil has been too ashamed to ever return to Ceredigion since then, but his bridge still remains. Next up at number 3 now, we have the traditional dress ghost. In January 2012, Paul Feehan took a trip to Abersoch in Wales. He and his friends took some film while resting on a bench by a lake area. It wasn't until they watched the video back that they saw something that didn't seem quite right. They discovered there had been a dark figure just standing there a few meters behind them the whole time. The figure barely moves during the whole video. This shocked Paul as he was absolutely certain there was nobody else around them at the time. After doing some research, he was surprised to see the figure's appearance seemed to match up eerily well with that of a woman in Welsh traditional folk dress. As you can see from all these pictures, if that really was a person, they would have been very close enough for them to easily spot. This has led some people to believe that it is the long dead spirit of a Welsh woman still wearing the clothes from her long gone era. Moving on to number 2 now, we have Merlin's Oak. According to legend, Merlin's Oak stood in the centre of Carmarthen. That's Merlin as in the Merlin, the one and only, one of the most famous wizards of all time. Locals say that Merlin told them that Carmarthen would drown if this oak tree was ever removed from that spot. With this curse in place, they say that a strange pointed notch appeared on the trunk of the tree that looks like the face of Merlin himself. For centuries, the locals remembered Merlin's words. Then, in the 1850s, it was poisoned by a local who objected to people holding meetings beneath it, but its trunk was preserved with iron railings. Finally, in the 1970s, it was removed when someone set the tree on fire. Then Carmarthen suffered its worst floods in many years. Some say the legend held up and that Merlin fulfilled his promise to drown the place if his oak was ever removed. And finally, number 1 now, we have Llandaff's ghost. Some ghost hunters travel long ways just to experience a single ghost. Well, Llandaff has not 1, not 2, 3 or 4, but 5 famous ghost stories, and they all date back to roughly the same era. The first is the story of a young boy who wore blue and drowned while playing on the banks of the River Taff. He is also said to be joined by the ghost of his mother, with onlookers reporting that they've seen the figure of a lady wading through the river late at night. They say she is forever looking for her son and trying to save him from the water. Another ghost is that of Bella, a woman who committed suicide in the area over 100 years ago. She's regularly seen along the Taff Trail in the woods. The spirit of another suicide victim, this time a man, is also said to haunt the graveyard there. Now he has been known to give people a sharp poke on the ghost tour and follow them around as they are guided through the area.